Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei for Other Dimensional Being Part 1. Chapter 1. Prologue. Silence, that was what filled the nothingness in the beginning. The blackness of emptiness had nothing to fill it with the noises of joy, sadness or pain that normal beings understood. It was just peacefully nothingness that was finally broken by the first noise to ever fill itself, an explosion that shook everything asunder. Colors, lights, energy and matter surged forth out of the center of the explosion, filling the once empty void with everything needed to create life, but nothing was there to form it into life. For an unknown amount of time, everything hung in the void without a purpose. Then the first awoke from its empty slumber, stretching formless limbs in the emptiness between masses of matter. It looked around before going to and fro, looking at all the objects that floated in the void before it gained a thought. To put some of the matter together to create something new, to have something else to fill its time doing without just floating around watching everything spin in the void. Slowly, matter was put together into different shapes of various sizes. The first soon had created countless shapes from the matter surrounding it before it started feeling other beings awaken as well. They would open formless eyes before looking at the shapes of matter before starting to create with ideas of their own. The others returned to the emptiness to continue sleeping forevermore, not that the first cared. It started forming spheres with masses upon it, blue water covering its surface as green appeared on the masses above the water. The first thought of a name to call the spheres before settling on planet, a place where life could grow. Soon, it created more of these spheres, forming an entire system centered around a star. Once it had created its ideal system, it started to go and see the other creations. The others created different systems of their own, formed in the spherical design. The amount of stars was different, but it was close enough that it didn't matter, life was being placed upon these spheres. The others were pleased with their creations, as their world started to worship them as gods or goddesses. The first returned to its system and found that its world had its own beings of power, but they didn't seem to know what it was. That filled it with the feelings of loneliness again until something filled the void, a new emotion that was being felt by everyone. It was something that made the first shudder, not understanding the emotion at all before another came through with brilliant clarity. Horror, plain and simple, as one of the others shrieked into the void as the darkness was torn open. Something was trying to get into their universe, something that they could feel was directing its all onto the life-covered worlds they had created. Driven by something that made the first hadn't felt at all, a hole in itself that couldn't be filled by any means of thought. Soon, a vision of it could be seen across the connections that all the beings shared, all seeing the same image as it happened. The blackness was torn open, growing wider as eldritch lights filled the tier in reality. Slithering out of the rip came a vaguely shaped form, the color of orange suns, the alien-shaped head opening its jaws in a silent cry of victory. It was followed by another, then another, the tier only ripping itself wider as it moved two massive limbs out of the tiers. Like wings, they spread impossibly wide in the spaces between systems. The body sliding out like some serpentine demon taking its time in its new reality. The others didn't know what to do with this new entity, and it cost them dearly. In the briefest moment of uncertainty, the monstrosity rushed towards the closest system, and it was devoured in a raging inferno. The awakened one tried to stop it, but it was devoured alongside its creations, leaving nothing but a burnt feeling where life had been. Once the creature had consumed all life, it started to glow in a golden eldritch luster that hurt the first's eyes as it started to enlarge with the matter it had consumed. The others tried to fight the abomination, only to be consumed and enlarge the parasitic entity further. The first finally came up with a plan, one that would cost the others, but it would seal the freak of hunger away. The first had the others gather their powers together, becoming one being that could stand up to the eldritch horror. The first made a huge mistake, in doing this, the others became a monster themselves. They attacked the eldritch horror, tearing it apart as they pushed it back into the tier of reality it had created. The massive power then forced the being into the tier before pulling it closed, using its own power to hold it shut. The first could only watch as the others gave up their lives to hold that tier in reality closed, for how long though? It wouldn't know as it gathered the shattered worlds from its closest family, fusing them together into one final sphere. This amalgamation of the others' worlds was given a name by the first, Earth. Earth was a promise to the fallen ones, the first wanted to have them be remembered. In doing this, the first then created beings of power similar to itself before it fell into a deep visionless state of nothingness. These beings of power soon took over the earth, beginning the ageless and timeless wars and other conflicts that would plague the final gift of the first until the end of time. Gods, goddesses, titan, fae, it didn't matter as that was all they ever knew. Even the beings called Great Red and the Ouroboros didn't even know of what the first and the others did to keep back the eternal hunger, threatened to end all life. Until the seal cracked, something that could be heard across the universe by everything. A soft crack upon which the seal that had held back the golden eldritch horror for eons began to widen, the alien glow glinting through the cracks as multiple red lights could be seen. As though something was looking back into the universe once more, staring in unceasing hunger at the life-filled planet that it could see. The crack widened, the golden light pushing out, ripping into the seal, chunks being pulled into the tier between realities. Widening the opening, the horror finally shoved a golden winged appendage through the opening. Unfurling its freed wing in the lights of the billions of stars that shone in the void, sending out rays of light into even the darkest corners of the universe. Soon, the opening only got bigger, the horror clawing its way out of its own prison. 3 ghastly heads on long serpentine necks slithered around in the void as its multiple crimson eyes took in the changed view. Its body had solidified, changing from fiery and formless to something far more tangible. Its body was all gold, truly alien in design as its massive wings stretched out. Its 2 legs tipped with glinting talons, dug into the mass that once was the power of the others. Twin impossibly long tails whipped out behind it, energy surging between the two. The beast of another reality launched itself into the void, wings barely moving as its long necks moved with impossible grace through the emptiness. Heading towards Earth, towards a feast that could potentially satiate its ever-growing, eternal hunger. Reality warped, the sky twisted into a rictus as the eldritch monster descended from the void. The once peaceful cloud cover was pulled into a hurricane that began to cover the planet as gravity started to shift unnaturally. Holes in reality started to open up, lightning torching the formerly green world below. The ground tore itself open, and lava spewed forth as the golden alien landed lightly upon the ground, its 3 heads looking around as the planet tore itself apart due to its horrific nature. Below him grimaced as he stood upon a mountaintop, his once pure white robe flapping in the winds as he looked upon the horror that had appeared on this world. This monster was eternal hunger given form, starvation that could never be satiated. Its eyes then all focused on him, the Holy Father of heaven and earth. He had left his wife back in heaven, not wanting her to get caught in the crossfire between 2 beings. His children were not the same, however, as he could feel them closing in. Lucifer was at their head, the second born after Jesus, leading the armies of heaven with grace that was as pure as his brother. Yahweh turned and looked at his second eldest son, seeing the legions of angels behind him. "Father," Lucifer called, his voice carrying over the wastelands of destruction, "we have come to help. Jesus is making sure Mother doesn't come to any harm." Abinai shook his head, holding up a single hand. "Lucifer, my son, don't come any closer." "But father." Lucifer began to protest, clearly wanting to help him. "No," Elohim said, his tone final but gentle, "I must do this alone. I will not lose my family to this hunger-driven abomination. Your souls will be torn apart from this Leviathan's powers." Lucifer looked at the monster standing impossibly tall above them before bowing his head. "As you say, Father." God turned back to the horror before calling truth into his hands, the light so intense that it hid him from view. His own children had to cover their eyes, the intensity was so blinding. He hurled the first spear of truth at the monster, the energy soaring through the sky. The beast howled before the spear was warped around the beast and destroyed a valley of mountains, the force causing the world to glow with light. The creature let out a cackling roar, laughing in its eldritch tongue before unfurling its wings. Lightning-like energy jumped out of the wing tips, hitting the ground with enough force to cause the armies of heaven to take flight. The 3 mouths opened, lights flashing out of its mouth. Upon contact with the earth, mountain-sized chunks of the planet were ripped out of the ground and floated in the air. The golden alien light surrounding them all as the creature roared in challenge, Yahweh looking in surprise. How he started to ask before these mountains of earth were hurled at him. Debris was sent flying as the massive chunks collided, forcing Elohim to appear elsewhere on the battlefield, but another arsenal of mountains was there to meet him. This continued until another blaze of truth struck the monstrosity, causing it to drop the other floating mountains of earth. Its shield had blocked the blow, but the monster was clearly not amused, shifting tactics. Its tail tips shifted, getting closer together before a hole in reality formed between them. Several other holes, similar to black holes, appeared in the air around Elohim. The monster snarled before the central head opened its jaws wide, a pentagram forming inside of its jaws, before he was bombarded by his own truth spears. The mountains, valleys, rivers and caves all erupted as hundreds, no, thousands of these spears struck at where God had been. Yahweh hissed as he was sent flying into another mountain, crashing into it hard enough, he thought his body would be shattered upon the rocks themselves. He got up before bellowing in absolute agony, his body struck from behind by a torrent of alien energy in the shape of lightning. His skin warped and burned, his robe turned black as his body felt like dying. He couldn't move, his form barely able to hold it together before it ended. The abomination laughed at his pain, before all 3 heads unleashed their beams of torment again. He shook in place, roaring in pain as he saw everything from his past reaching up to this point. In that pain, he formed a final spear made of truth. He couldn't move enough to even hurl it, that was until the pain left. Looking up, he saw the monster howling in outrage as Lucifer had thrown one of his own spears of truth at the beast. The shield had a crack in it, truth finally shining through its alien form. He stood, shaking the pain away before he hurled the truth spear through the chest of the monster, shattering its shields with a mighty blow. He stepped out of the clouds of destruction as the creature collapsed with a howl of pain but continued to live, defying truth itself to survive. He then looked to his second eldest son before smiling, his sword being thrown to him by Lucifer. Catching the weapon, he felt himself get stronger as Excalibur ignited into pure holy flames. He launched himself at the monster before cleaving between the central and right necks, from body to leg. The part fell away as he did the same to the other side, sweat beading on his brow as he felt Excalibur shaking in his grip. Looking at the blade, he saw that it was cracked and near shattering. The central head scoffed and laughed at him, causing Elohim to look at the monster with distaste. He lifted his free hand as he focused all his powers upon the eldritch horror he had carved in 3 pieces. Seals of power covered all 3 parts, glowing with truth and grace. He grunted as the creature's own energy fought against his seals before he forced his will upon it. Enough. I seal thee. He roared as the golden monster exploded into light so bright that even he had to look away as the scream filled the air as it vanished into nothing. Looking down, God found that the parts had become 3 different items. The right head had become a lightning-like sword, the left becoming a pair of small arm shields. The central head had become a gauntlet, one that seemed to not really be there as he looked at it. He brought himself to the ground before almost collapsing, only to be caught by Lucifer. "Father," his son said in worry, looking at him, "you're so pale and clammy. What did you do?" Yahweh winced. "I sealed this monster, this Ghidorah, away with my own life, it's draining me as we speak, Lucifer." Lucifer looked horrified at this proclamation. "Father, why did you do that? Mother is going to kill you, revive you, then kill you again for doing something so stupid." He chuckled, "Some things just have to be done, my son." It was generations later that heaven found itself in a mournful state over the death of its creator, the mother of heaven, crying over the body of her fallen husband. She had been crying for days, unable to come to the fact that her one love was dead and not coming back. Stabbed in the back by one of her fallen grandchildren, already weakened by sealing the both that abomination from ages past and sealing the horror known as Trihexa. She finally lifted her head as she looked up to see her first daughter walking up to her before hugging her. The blonde-haired angel curled up against her body, shaking with tears that fell down her cheeks. The mother of heaven nearly choked as her daughter's wings flickered from pure white to black, then back again. "Gabriel," she murmured before she was cut off by her daughter. "Heaven is falling apart," Gabriel murmured, "the machine is dying, Michael can't figure it out. Angels are falling because of the commandments, Mother, we're going to fall if we don't do anything." The mother shook her head. "No, I'm not going to allow that to happen. Now, where are those accursed gears?" Gabriel froze. "Those gears?" She nodded. "We need to seal them away permanently." When Gabriel was about to enter, Michael came rushing in. "Mother, the gears. They vanished." The mother of heaven felt her immortal heart freeze, the cackling call filling her mind as she could only imagine the worst happening to the world now that those gears were loose upon it. A monster that would do anything to regain its body, to feed upon the planet. "We need to fix what your father should have fixed beforehand," she said, standing up. "Michael, get the rest of the children." It's time I stepped up and took a firmer hand in the workings of my husband's works. "Of course, Mother." Chapter 2. Lies and Faults. The day of the date had arrived. He hadn't slept much since he had been asked out by Yuma a few days ago. But it's not like he wasn't used to the lack of honest nocturnal rest. Issei had never once in his life had a very restful night's rest, having had rather deep insomniac problems ever since he had been a young child. His parents had taken him to the best doctors that they could afford to help him, to no significant or long-lasting effect. Nothing could stop his nightmares in the slightest. For years he suffered until he made a friend with Irina. Those had been the best times of his life until Irina's family had to move away, something to do with Irina's dad having to move closer to work. After that, the nightmares resurfaced again, striking with a vengeance that was absolutely abysmal for the lonely Issei. His parents could only watch as he suffered and continued to grow closer to death's doors, until now. "Would you go out on a date with me, Issei Haidu?" Yuma had asked him out on a date before school a few days ago, and he had never felt so light on his feet. Issei then tried to ask his only true female friend, Ika Kiryu, for some dating advice. Ika didn't have any that would help him, as she had never been on a proper date before. So that left his parents for dating advice. That day had taken so long to end, but it was worth the wait. Upon getting back home, Issei had immediately told his parents what had happened at school. Goru Haidu had been joyful that his son had gotten a date, despite the odd circumstances of it. Miki Haidu had been more cautious, but was very optimistic about the whole affair in her own loving way. "Well," she had said after a few moments, "we will need to give him a plan of what to do on a date." So, the planning had taken a few days. Issei had never realized the intricacies that went into the regular date, though it seemed that it was a lost art in his generation. Starting with location, Issei had wanted to go all out, but that idea had been swiftly but gently shot down by both parents. Going all out, his father, Goru, had told him, is not what you want to do on the first date. The first date is the time for you and your girl to get to understand one another a bit better in a short time frame. Going all out is more for the wedding, son. So what do you suggest I do, Dad? Issei had asked him. Easy, Goru said, go and plan something simple that would show your interest, but not trying to show off like some ridiculous Amazon bird. Nikki had helped him set up his allowance for the date, given what all three collectively agreed on. Then both parents taught him manners, etiquette and proper decorum. Both were quite thorough in their training and also got Issei some good clothing to wear for the date. He tried to look his best, wearing one of his dad's smallest button-down shirts. As he waited, he hoped she wouldn't stand him up like other girls had done in the past. Sorry I'm late. Yuma said, running up in a rather stunning light purple sundress. Why you're not, Issei said softly, blushing at her beauty. Holding out his arm, like his dad had practiced with him to do, he waited for her to loop arm in his. She giggled and did so, allowing Issei to lead her onwards. The date took them to a rather expensive diner, one that Issei knew had great shakes and good food. He paid for everything, allowing Yuma to order first, then got his. He simply wanted to put his all into this date to show he wasn't just going to be a pervert that was going to end up without a girl like his friends. Chatting all the while, Issei did his best to push aside the tiredness his body was complaining about. He would not collapse on his date, he would not. He then guided her to the local arcade, paying for all the games they played. He even won her a small stuffed teddy bear, which she hugged to her bosom. As the sun was setting over the hills and buildings around Kuo, the pair finished the date by walking to the fountain in the local park. That was a wonderful date, Issei, Yuma said, smiling at him, I did enjoy it. I did my best, I wanted you to enjoy yourself. Issei's reply came. Yuma was silent for a moment before she asked, Issei, could you do something for me? It's extremely important. Oh of course, he said, wondering what could be so important that she had to ask him, what is it? Yuma turned, walking closer to him before leaning forward. Her lips brushed against his ear as she said in a rather cold and sadistic purr of a whisper. Could you die for me, Issei Haidu? That was when Issei felt the light stabbing through his gut, blood splattering across the stones of the park. He stood, as though he couldn't understand what was happening to him. His own vision blurred at the edges as he saw Yuma's sundress turn into a BDSM-style leather outfit as she laughed at his dying form, only to stop with a cruel smirk. Stupid mortal child, Yuma said, cackling as she looked at the small stuffed bear before causing it to burst into flames. Did you really think I would care about all the effort you put into this shame of a date? Issei only staggered, blood oozing into his mouth. He felt it running out of the corner of his mouth as he tried to stay standing. Yuma only watched him before smugly smirking at him. If anything, she said, her voice gaining a false impression of sincerity, before she pulled her spear of light out of his guts, you can blame God himself for giving you that blessing you'll never ever use. Issei gasped before coughing, splattering more of his own blood across the stones of the park. But, even after all of that, Issei remained alive and breathing. Yuma stared at him with shock written across her rather hauntingly beautiful face before she grimaced in annoyance, stomping up to him. Stupid humans don't know when to fucking die. She snarled before her body went rigid, something reflecting in her violet eyes. His eyes looked down, noticing his shadow shifting so it faced towards Yuma. Was that even her name? Out of it came something long and snake-like, covered almost completely in spines, swimming across the ground as its blackness moved up her shadow. Its pincer-like jaws opened before snapping around her head, causing Issei to grow cold. He could feel her struggles within its maw, screaming as the shadow began to swallow her. Its curved teeth sank into her flesh, causing the wounds to appear on her body. Blood spilling out of the holes that appeared on her sinful form. She was lifted into the air, Issei watching in sheer horror as he felt Yuma squirm inside whatever was devouring her. It bit into her flesh again, drawing blood from her abdomen as she continued to scream. Bone snapped, flesh teared, and her screams were reduced to moans of pain. Finally, Yuma stopped making noise. Her struggling body ceased to move before vanishing into thin air. He could feel something sliding down into his body, gagging at what he had just seen and now felt. Something inside him twisted and turned, Issei could vaguely feel the pain fading away. Looking down at himself, Issei watched his muscles, sinew, flesh, bone and skin crisscrossed in order to fill the gap left by that spear of light. His eyes remained glued to the side of his own body, rapidly repairing itself of the wound inflicted upon his person with almost alien precision. He watched until the hole was completely repaired, like it never even happened at all. Issei blinked, understanding just out of his reach, no matter how much he tried to rationalize the situation. He was clearly high off of something, he must have been. Something in the food maybe. Shaking his head, he rubbed his face while his eyes grew heavy. Maybe he could sleep it off and everything would be fine. Yeah, sleep sounded real good right now. Issei made his way home almost at a snail's pace, constantly trying to rationalize tonight's events along the way. By the time Issei got into bed, having completely ignored his parents' concerns and inquiries in favor of resting, he had made up his mind that she had drugged him with something before leaving. I should really be careful from now on, Issei thought to himself. As soon as he closed his eyes, the nightmare that had haunted him started again. It started with the screams of countless beings that were being devoured by a shadowy monster. Issei heard them all these beings as they wailed in incomparable anguish, while a massive shadow loomed over the glowing forms of the humanoid creatures down below. The shadow snatches up the figures, who only screamed louder. As he looked into the dimly glowing mass of humanoids, Issei couldn't help but feel his eyes widen as he spotted Yuma amongst a sea of agony. She could easily be defined, details easily spotted as she tried to escape the masses. She had a pair of wings as her brightly glowing body seemed to dim and flicker. The look of panic and pain on her face as she turned to face him, reaching out for him before she was pulled even deeper into the well of torment. Help us. Save us. End this torment. They screamed in and out of sync, causing Issei to cover his ears. He could distinctly feel blood dripping out of them. Stop it. Issei shouted, bolting straight up in bed, fist flying out as he hit something. Issei felt his heart pounding, his body covered in sweat as his blankets were wrapped around him like a straitjacket. The top cover was ripped open as well, meaning that he was probably going to have to get another one later. He looked over and saw that he had destroyed his anime character clock, smashing it into bits in the far wall of his room. He tried to bring his racing heart to a normal pace, but it stayed beating violently until he took a shower. He quickly got dressed, heading to school as he tried to ignore his body telling him to get more sleep. He spotted Aika Kiryu, the only female pervert in the school, who ran up to him with Murayama and Caddis. Aika was a messy-haired brunette with square-shaped glasses that had the startling ability to measure a guy's manhood with frightening accuracy. She had done it to Issei before sitting in his lap, her eyes having gone wide. Issei had asked if she was alright, but she only waved off his concerns with a rather noticeable blush. Caddis was the girl whose hair was salmon pink, one of the famous kendo masters of Kuo. Friends with Aika through virtue of them wanting to help Issei actually survive his schooling years, Caddis had been the more moral backbone of the trio of female friends that Issei had. Though, that didn't stop her from whacking him with her training wooden sword if he started dozing off at the most inappropriate of times. On her left was Murayama, the other famous kendo master of Kuo. Murayama was also the softer spoken of the pair, letting her work speak for her. Though Issei was pretty sure his body would have been covered in her style of workmanship if it wasn't for his rather dysfunctional sleeping habits. The three had taken pity on him since he started showing ever-growing signs of the dysfunction, all of them assisting him in an attempt to fix his health. Of course, that was nearly a week after the start of Kuo Academy. Issei had collapsed, his body having given out after following his friends and peeping on the kendo club. They would have beaten him to black and blue if it wasn't for Caddis, realizing he wasn't in the best of health and dragged his ass to the nurse's office. Issei. Aika pulled the boy into a side hug as she dragged him to the nurse's office for the umpteenth time. Come on. Aika, he tried and failed to pull out of her grip as Murayama and Caddis flanked them. Stop, please. No, she said, pushing open the door to the nurse's office before shoving him into the vacant chair. We can't have you collapse into a coma in the middle of class. Your grades will tank. But why help me? Issei couldn't help but ask. You know I'm one of them. Caddis nodded, true, but you're the only one who hasn't really done anything, since you look like you're about to topple any second. Several of the kendo members were talking about doing something to lift your spirits due to you looking so awful. Issei shook his head at that bit of information before Aika pulled him onto his feet. Come on, lazy, let's go to the occult research club. Murayama frowned, why there? I don't know, maybe they have some mystic gypsy stuff that can help Issei sleep, since conventional medicine doesn't seem to work, Aika said before dragging Issei to where the orc was located. Therapy wasn't helping, conventional didn't work, and certain sleeping techniques could only work if Issei stayed in one position the entire time, which was simply impossible, given that Issei moved around a lot in his sleep. The building where the orc met was formerly the original academy building, but was too small for the growing number of students. It hadn't been used in years, though the orc had refurbished a few of the rooms for personal use, it was said. Aika dragged the dead on his feet Issei up the stairs, stopping before a pair of simple oak doors. The female pervert knocked before entering, pulling Issei inside while being flanked by the kendo masters of Kuo. Ria's Gremory was having a rather peaceful day alone in the club room while the others were in their respective classes, which she figured would not last given the fallen angel presence in her territory. She wanted to consult Sona about what they should do with this development, but apparently she was off with a different matter that needed her attention. Perhaps Sona had found another to be a member of her peerage. Ria's would ask her later. But right now, she had a more pressing engagement, namely the sudden appearance of 4 students, 3 females and 1 male. After having the 3 female students barge in with a notorious pervert, Issei Haidu, the devil expected a heavy complaint regarding his behavior since Sona wasn't available. What she got instead was something else entirely. Ria's Aika said, pointing to the very pale-looking Haidu at her side, we need some help with Issei's nightmares. Ria sat up from her seat, frowning, how horrible are we talking here? Aika maneuvered Issei onto the couch, where Issei's head lolled to one side while his eyes were half-lidded. The poor boy looked like he was about to keel over at any moment. Aika continued to speak, well, from what I've gathered, Issei's been suffering from these nightmares all his life. It's been a detriment and we're afraid he won't be awake enough to pay attention in class. Ria's only sat up even straighter. While all of Kuo was joint-ruled by herself and Sona, the people inside her purview were important and valuable. Issei Haidu was one of them, so as a co-ruler, it was under her jurisdiction to help in any manner she could. Within reason, of course. Could Issei describe the nightmares? The Grimoire heiress asked, looking at Issei. Aika shrugged, I'd think it would be better for him to draw it out. Riaz nodded before opening a drawer, producing a large pad of paper and some colored pencils. She stood up and walked over to Issei, handing him the items. Issei grabbed them before starting to draw, his hand going over the paper with swift, precise strokes, in spite of his apparent insomnia. In fact, it looked as if his arms were possessed. Soon, a clear image appeared on the page, one that made Riaz and the other 3 students very uncomfortable for some unknown reason, with the feeling being instinctual in Riaz's case. Its appearance was horrific, eldritch, and made the heiress in particular feel sick to her stomach. Taking the pad back after Issei had finished, she looked it over before glancing up at the 3 students. I don't have anything on me that could stop these, she said slowly, lifting her hand to stall any outburst, but I'll see if my family has some remedy for this. She smiled, noting how Issei's gaze went from her eyes down her sinful form before going back up. As though he had just realized she was a model of a sinful dream, then his eyes turned darker before he got up. Thank you for your time, he said curtly, bowing before grabbing Aika and leaving, practically dragging the other girl out. Let's go, Aika. Wah, hold on, Issei. Aika squeaked, I can walk. Riaz let the quartet leave, frowning as her fingers drifted across the greatly detailed scene on the page once more. Whatever Issei was seeing at night, it wasn't pleasant to behold. Something about it was just alien, almost as if she was staring into another world where pain and torment ruled. A world where this shadow devoured all hope, within its maw came nothing but darkness. Honestly, it looked like something H.P. Lovecraft or Stephen King would make in their spare time. Riaz shuddered as she closed a paper pad, realizing that she had been staring way too hard at it for the last 15 minutes. She had to show this to Sona immediately, then maybe her older brother. If this was what one of her charges was seeing at night and was a consistent lifelong occurrence, it had to have some significance. When Sona Sitri returned from her underworld duties, the last thing she was expecting was to see Riaz waiting for her in her own office inside the school. The crimson-haired heiress looked deep in thought as the light blue glow of the transportation circle faded into nothing, which caused Sona to frown in thought as well. Stepping forward, Sona also spotted the young lady was carrying a large drawing pad under one arm. Do you need something, Riaz? Sona asked, bringing her out of her thoughts. In fact, the young woman said, nodding for effect, I do need to discuss something with you. It involves one of the humans in our jurisdiction. Sona raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything, motioning for Riaz to have a seat in one of the 2 comfortable chairs in the student council room. As they both sat down, Sona couldn't help but continue to glance at the drawing pad that Riaz was carrying. Something about it was off, it gave off the sort of wrongness she expected of a tainted magical object. Riaz carefully handled the pad before passing it over to Sona, who only raised an eyebrow before taking it out of her friend's hands. Upon opening it, Sona dropped the pad like it had electrocuted her by some invisible means. It landed open, showing the horrific image that was drawn upon its face. Riaz had gotten to her feet at Sona's reaction, looking between her and the pad with concern. Riaz, Sona said, the words barely above a whisper, do you know what that is? Riaz shook her head, I don't, which is why I came to you for help on this. Sona looked at Riaz, giving her a look that was both piercing and unrelenting in its intensity. Those are souls, Riaz. Riaz went stone still before looking at the image on the floor, souls. But how? I thought souls were invisible to the untrained eye, even beings like us can't see them. Sona shook her head, not exactly, Riaz. Necromancers and other death dealers can see souls, as they work so closely with death that they can see past the veil that covers the bridge between life and death. What does that have to do with his image? Sona reluctantly picked up the pad and put it on the small coffee table between the 2 chairs, pointing at the extremely detailed humanoid figures. These are not what normal necromancers see, Riaz, Sona said softly, they only see a vague shape of the soul, not the full person it once belonged to. This is way too detailed to be even remotely normal in any definition of the word, it's alien and horrific. Riaz looked at the image, her face paling at the new information that had been provided. Sona returned her gaze to the image, feeling revulsion run its way through her insides like a wave of sickness. Then Sona tore her gaze from the alien image and forced it to focus on Ria's. Who drew this image, Ria's? Sona asked softly, her hands gripping the armrests to keep them from shaking. Issei who drew this, Ria said in a murmur, slowly turning to face Sona with a rather shaken look. It was Aika's idea to have him draw out what he had been seeing for years. She said he's been having nightmares for all his life, so I can only assume this is what he is seeing. Sona got up, having to get herself away from the paper as she hissed, close that pad, things of that nature should not be seen in the open so casually. Ria snapped the drawing pad closed, her body slightly shaking before she followed Sona to her desk. Sona pulled out Issei Haidu's file, opening it before starting to look through his medical records. He's been through therapy, consoling and several medications to help him with his nightmares. Sona summarized the rather packed file, wincing at some of the treatment results showing negatives. Nothing worked for him. How is he not dead yet? Ria's frowned, what do you mean by that? Sona gave Ria's a stern look. Issei, by all normal accounts, shouldn't even be walking around or even have drawn that accursed image in the first place. His body should be dead, pushing up daisies. Issei Haidu shouldn't even be amongst the living due to his lack of being able to sleep, which should have killed him years ago. Ria's frown only deepened at this revelation, but he only looked like he hadn't gotten enough sleep when I saw him a few hours ago. Sona paused, taking in the information given before saying, only like he hadn't had enough sleep. Ria's only nodded, yes, exactly. Sona closed Issei's medical file as she tried to make sense of what she was hearing, but understanding fled her completely. She couldn't understand how Issei was alive when everything dictated he should be 6 feet under, nothing actually made sense for this at all. Pulling off her glasses, Sona rubbed her eyes as she felt a wave of exhaustion come over her in a rush. Has there been any word on where the fallen angels are encamped, Ria's? Sona asked her co-ruler, dropping the Issei topic for now. Ria's nodded, I've had Kaneko and Kiba doing some surveillance around the town. They've noticed a rather large amount of activity around the old church building that overlooks Kuo. Not much else, however, seems that whoever is in charge has put up devil deterrent wards around the building itself. Leading all normal conclusions to the group being a rogue one doesn't set up devil deterrents without having some sort of plan behind it. Sona said before looking out the window, noticing the setting sun as it sinks behind the trees. Halloranor grimaced, watching from the open window at the top of the church tower. Raynor hadn't come back from her date with that supposed sacred gear user, in fact, nothing of her could be found at all. It was like she disappeared into thin air, nothing left behind to be accounted for. The blue-haired fallen woman shook her head, turning towards the inner staircase before stepping off them. Her wings opened to allow herself to gently float down without actually having to walk. Upon landing on the ground floor, she walked into the church proper. She spotted exorcists in small groups talking to one another, along with other fallen that had joined them. All of them having gone rogue, though they were quite weak even with the numbers advantage on their side. She moved her way through them, completely avoiding the horrid being that called itself Reed before spotting Donaseek. Walking up to him, she muttered to him, Raynor is not coming back, the only lead is that boy she went on a date with. Donaseek looked at her from under his fedora, so, you want me to get some information out of him? Halloranor nodded, make it quick, then end him. I don't want any witnesses to what we're doing here, given that our quarry hasn't even shown up yet. Donaseek adjusted his hat before nodding, consider it done, the boy won't be standing once I'm finished with him. He unfurled his 4 raven wings before taking off through a hole in the roof, leaving a few small feathers in his wake. Issei was enjoying leaving school when Aika followed after him, giving him a goofy grin as she fell into step. The brunette had been a handful all day, making sure Issei stayed awake and was actually learning something. While Issei wished to deny it, Aika, Kadis and Murayama had done their best to help him. His grades wouldn't be plummeting into the earth, which he didn't want his parents to start getting on him about. He had enough with his dysfunctional sleeping, horrible nightmares and lack of mental power to stay awake. You know, Riaz was able to get me a herbal blend that may help you from seeing your nightmares, Aika said, holding up a small paper bag, though she was going to give it to you, but you had already left. Issei took the offered bag, holding it loosely as he looked at Aika with what he hoped was a look of gratefulness. Aika smiled back before tilting her head to the park, putting her hands behind her back like she was some innocent maiden. Care for a stroll around the park before heading home? I heard it can help clear your head. Issei snorted at that, more likely to give me allergies. Aika elbowed his arm, come on, Issei, you need to clear that head of yours anyway. Aika then dragged him to the park, much like she did with him earlier that day. Issei didn't stop her, his body refusing to listen to his mental orders to resist. Was he that tired out? He pushed that thought away as he was dragged to one of the paths that the huge park offered for walking. Aika grinned as she let him go and spun around him a few times, looking like a loon. Come on, she laughed, can't tell me you don't enjoy the weather we're having right now. Issei smiled as she led him down the path, letting her talk and ramble about this or that, distracting him from his tired mind and aching body, which helped him forget about his nightmares for now. This continued for several minutes before nearly running into Ika's back, for she had stopped moving and talking. "What's wrong?" he asked, confusion filling his voice as he looked around. "She can't hear you nor do anything, boy," a man in a trench coat and fedora said, stepping out of the tree line and into the final lights of the setting sun, "nor will she remember you existing once I'm done here." Issei felt his blood run cold, his skin turning to ice, and his mind seemingly fully waking up. Panic started to set in as he tried to look for a way out as the man casually walked up towards him. Issei stumbled over his own feet, almost falling over, but the man grabbed him by his shirt and held a spear that glowed with light to his chin. "Now," he said in a growl, looking darkly at Issei, "where is Rainer, kid?" Who?" Issei asked, confused, not even knowing who that person was. The man tilted his head before muttering, "Guess her magic was strong enough to completely wipe her from your memory, too bad." Issei fell onto the pavement before screaming as the spear ran him through the chest, center mass. Gagging, coughing, Issei looked at the man as he saw darkness fill his vision. "It's nothing personal, boy," the man said before 4 huge raven wings came out of his back, "it's just orders." Donosik watched as the boy, Issei he heard the girl say earlier, died with his spear of light through his chest. He dispelled the energy, watching the hole in the kid's chest bleed. The boy's eyes glazed over as death took him and Donosik turned to leave, about ready to end the spell he had placed on the area. Something moved behind him, causing him to turn to find whatever was near him. He spotted nothing but the frozen girl and the cadaver on the ground, which must have been his imagination. The fallen turned away again, only for his hearing to pick up the sounds of bones grinding against concrete. The only reason he knew that sound was because he had caused that sound to happen ages ago on another mission. He turned and felt his blood run colder than the frozen wastelands of Cocytus. The boy had somehow flipped himself over, dragging himself towards a bench. A trail of blood followed as the sound of bones scraping against concrete was more easily heard. He couldn't make sense of it, he had put a rather powerful light spear through the kid's chest, which had disintegrated his lungs and heart instantly. Yet the boy still moved as though he had them, which was utterly unnatural. Summoning another spear, Donosik took careful aim and hurled it into the kid's back. It hit true and the body stilled, collapsing like a puppet cut from its strings. He got closer to inspect the corpse before jumping as it started moving again, grabbing the bench and pulling itself to its feet. "What in the hell?" he swore, watching as the kid grabbed the spear and pulled it through his body, causing another hole to form. The kid then turned, causing Donosik to nearly step back in shock and horror. Issei's face was pale white, without any blood. He stood awkwardly like he didn't know how to work his own flesh into a proper standing position. Arms hanging at his sides, legs lightly bent to hold his weight. But that wasn't what got Donosik's attention the most, it was the boy's eyes. The kid had brown eyes, but now, the right one was completely red. Glowing crimson like freshly spilt blood, it bore into Donosik's mind and soul, like he was being viewed by something that wasn't truly of this earthly realm. The wound in Issei's chest was also repairing itself, the scraping sound was from his ribsage going across the path as it had fully regenerated. Muscles and fibers were also growing back as Donosik watched as the destroyed organs simply knit themselves back into existence. The wounds which would have instantly killed any normal human were shrugged off by this boy, one that was staring at him with that glowing red eye. Then Donosik noticed another detail he had missed due to watching the wounds repair themselves. The boy's right arm started to smolder, blustering like his own muscles were burning the skin off. The skin turned black, falling off like ash to reveal the red muscles and tendons underneath. The skin near the kid's elbow rippled before black tentacles slithered out from under the skin, crawling and wrapping themselves in and over the exposed flesh. Upon covering the arm, the black mass started to steam as large claws grew out of the fingers that looked similar to dragon claws. Then scales grew out of the top of the arm, curling around the arm from the wrist all the way up to where the elbow met the new black skin. The scales then gained a dull golden luster as 2 horn-like projections slid out of the back of the scaly armor. Golden scales covered the top of the hand before what looked like 3 eyes pushed out of the top, forming a triangle. Out of the 3 eyes, only one started to glow a vivid crimson red. The eye was at the top of the triangle, though the shape had the top pointing at the pavement. It rolled around, seemingly taking in everything before it focused its alien gaze on Donosik. Like a predator sizing up its newest prey item. The arm shook before lifting, energy gathering into the palm of its hand. It was a pale golden color, dim and weak. Flickering like it wasn't really there in the first place, but that wasn't what caught Donosik off guard. The sphere became 4 smaller balls that rushed him, moving up and down in a wave-like rhythm before all 4 slammed into his chest. He was sent flying backwards, his chest exploding with pain as he hit the ground and rolled. He slowly got up, looking at the boy, whose arm had dropped to his side again. Looking down at himself, Donosik nearly gagged. His chest had been blown open, his ribs were blackened as his muscles and skin were shreds. He was also able to see his own lungs and beating heart as he quickly pulled his ruined trench coat around himself. Without a second thought, Donasek beat a hasty retreat. The fallen didn't even see Issei collapse back onto the ground as the gauntlet disintegrated, leaving a fully healed arm in its place. By the time Ika dragged Issei home, she knew he was out cold. Probably one of the only reasons she let Issei stay passed out, he wasn't thrashing or doing anything that would indicate he was being haunted by a nightmare. But upon seeing Miki and Goru Haidu, she knew that she was going to have to come up with some explanation as to why their son was covered in blood and sleeping. To which she had none, not even after explaining to them what she did know. Mr. Haidu did thank her for getting Issei home and paid her back by feeding her some food. Miki's cooking was wonderful as always. After eating and giving her farewells, Ika quickly went to her apartment and called both Kadis and Murayama about what had happened. Back at the abandoned church, Kalwarnar watched as several fallen angels healed Donasek of his rather grievous wounds. The fallen had slammed into the front doors, nearly dying in several rogue exorcist arms as he was dragged in. Kalwarnar grimaced, not even knowing what had done this to him at all. He had passed out upon hitting the doors at full tilts, which didn't help her at all. She could only hope that they weren't messing with forces beyond their control. Riaz looked at Kaneko as she finished her report, feeling rather sick to her stomach. Kaneko had just come back with a rather horrific and gruesome report of Issei, using his sacred gear to cause a fallen angel to retreat. Except that he had been killed first, he should have been dead. Kaneko even said she heard his heart stop as it had disintegrated upon the spear running him through the chest. "You can go, Kaneko," she said to her workpiece, who nodded and left. Riaz hugged herself before starting to make a plan in her mind. She would have to tell Issei about the supernatural world. It was unavoidable, he couldn't simply rationalize this one away. Grimacing, Riaz stood up and started pacing up and down the orc. She didn't have any idea on how to properly bring up the topic with a young man until an idea hit her, a small one. She could tell Issei by asking him to meet her, though she would have to do it in person. Probably with Sona as well, best to have someone of the world Issei was going to be a part of help explain it. She stopped pacing as she frowned, realizing that Sona would be busy with her work for the next few days, so she'd have to postpone the introduction for several days. She ran a hand through her hair before shaking her head. She would talk to Sona about this tomorrow, she was much too tired to think straight after all the revelations she had received. The next day, Issei woke up after a restful but still haunted sleep. He found himself in his bed once again, but his parents told him that he had collapsed and Ika had to drag him home. He promised to thank her profusely for doing such a thing. Upon reaching school, he did just that with Ika, who said that because he was her friend, he didn't need to. The rest of the school day was much easier for Issei to go through, but he nearly passed out during the final class of the day as his body was still trying to repair itself. So, after a long day at school, Issei was trying to relax in the park, Ika having placed his head in her lap to allow him to rest when he was distracted by a soft noise. Opening his tired eyes, he sat up and saw a young girl in a very outdated nun dress on her knees. Issei got up and helped her to a standing position before smiling at her. "Are you alright?" he asked before seeing her confused face. He then switched languages, his mother had taught him several, but the only one that had stuck around the longest was Italian. That had been useful for when they had gone to Italy for a vacation years ago. "Sorry, do you understand me now?" he asked, to which the girl nodded with a joyous smile. "Yes, I understand you now," she said, putting her hands together like she was going to pray. "Thank you, kind sir." Ika looked at Issei with a raised eyebrow. "You can understand her?" Issei looked back. "It's Italian, Ika, not Latin." Ika snorted. "Well, she's pretty cute." Issei rolled his eyes. "Anyway, I'm Haidu Issei, and you are?" The girl nodded before answering. "I'm Asia Argento, and I'm sort of lost. I was trying to find the church in the area, but I barely understand what the signs say. My Japanese isn't that good." Issei nodded before smiling. "Well, I'm sure Ika and I can lead you there." Asia's eyes seemed to glow with joy. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." She hugged him before he felt his tiredness and exhaustion slip away as Asia had pulled back and held her hands before him. Her middle fingers had green spheres on top of them, like she was wearing invisible rings. Ika looked him over before gasping in shock. "She healed you, Issei. You don't look so pale anymore," she said in a stage whisper before handing him a personal mirror. Issei looked at himself in the mirror, eyes widening at his skin. He looked like he hadn't been dysfunctionally sleeping for his entire life, his skin a more natural color. The heavy bags under his eyes were gone and he looked generally healthier. "How?" he asked, looking at Asia in shock. "You look like you needed a miracle from the Lord," Asia said, bowing her head as she smiled. "I had to give one that looked so downtrodden and depressed the healing he needed." The Ika and Issei shared a look before Issei said, "Let's get you to the church then, I'm sure others will need your miracles as well." Chapter 3. revelations and terror. The journey to the abandoned church was a rather lengthy one, as the trio stopped when Asia spotted people in need of physical healing or even some gentle comforting. From young to old, Issei and Aika watched as Asia either healed them or gave them comfort, with Issei as a translator due to the communication barrier. Asia knew only a few simple phrases in Japanese, but those were the generalist statements like giving thanks and greetings. That didn't stop the former sister, who gave her all into the welfare of her fellow human beings. They had stopped again, as Asia had found a young boy that had scraped his knee and was determined to heal it up. The boy couldn't believe that his scraps disappeared, but gave Asia a hug before thanking her and running up to his mother. The mom was shocked, but thanked Asia all the same before taking her son home, clearly wanting to get off her feet for a bit. "I hope I helped everyone," Asia said with some trepidation in her voice. "I don't want to be seen as unhelpful." Issei shook his head. "Asia, I'm pretty sure Kua will be talking about your good deeds for weeks." Aika smiled. "Well, given all the people she helped, I'm pretty sure they'll be talking about her." Issei looked at his friend before turning away, smiling as he pointed up towards the abandoned church. It didn't look like much anymore since it had been abandoned when the last preacher had been run out of town several centuries back, which hadn't left much for it. How it was still standing was beyond Issei's knowledge, but that didn't matter. Right now, he saw a woman standing in the doorway of the old building. "Oh," Asia said, looking flushed as she looked at Aika and then bowed. "Thank you for bringing me here safely." "We're friends," Issei said easily. "Friends help one another with everything they can." Asia smiled softly at him before hugging Issei tightly, following it by hugging Aika, then running off towards the blue-haired woman. The pair watched her run off, disappearing into the interior of the old church building. As the door closed behind them, Issei looked at Aika. "Want to go to the arcade?" he asked, more in wanting to do something instead of standing there awkwardly. Aika grinned. "Of course, that new dancing machine got installed yesterday, and I've wanted to beat you at it. You seem super awake for that." Issei realized his mistake when he was trounced in the arcade so badly by Aika that day. By the time Issei got home, he was still full of energy. His mother and father noticed his changes quite quickly, asking him what had happened. He told them about Asia and her gift of healing, which caused Goro to look at Mickey with a glance that hid more in it than Issei could understand. Mickey quickly sent another look back before giving Issei his marching orders to wash up for dinner. Issei obeyed. Mickey's cooking was heavenly. As they ate dinner, Issei talked nearly non-stop about everything. It was like he had been lifted of his burden that had tormented him all his life, even though he could feel it slowly creeping back in the back of his mind. His parents lapped it all up, laughing and smiling, as Issei talked with a fervor that they didn't want to miss. Soon, the food was gone, and Mickey had Issei help her with the dishes. As Issei was washing a bowl, Mickey spoke up. "Issei, could I ask you for a favor?" "Anything, Mom," Issei said in reply, looking over at her. "What is it?" Mickey motioned to some bags, which held some food in them, "You know the Maritos." Issei thought about it before nodding. "They're the older couple that are in the apartment complex only a few blocks away." His mother nodded. "Indeed, I got a call from Yura that she couldn't cook anything due to not feeling well, so I said I'd cook her something. Could you go deliver it?" Issei nodded with a grin. "Of course, let me finish up here." By the time Issei arrived at the apartment complex, he started noticing a change in the air as he carried the bags of food up to the apartment before stopping. The door had been left open, but the sight of blood splattered against the entry hallway caused him to nearly empty his guts. He didn't even realize he had dropped the bags of food as he slowly went inside, trying to rationalize what could have happened. He then saw what had happened. Both Mr. and Mrs. Maritos were hanging on self-made crosses. Both of them were stripped to nothing and had clearly been shot, burned slashes across their bodies. Issei turned green before he heard something behind him, like the clicking of something. Turning, Issei's eyes widened. "All who worship the Lord, but summon the devil's servants are beyond help," a man said, pointing a gun at Issei's face. "Those who see their crimes and know of them shall be purged by the light of the Holy Church's exorcists." "So be it, amen." Issei didn't even have time to make a sound for help as he felt the right side of his head explode, pain shooting through his nerves as he collapsed onto the floor. His vision was cut in half, slowly darkening as he bled across the floor. He was also pretty sure half of his brain was splattered across Mr. Morito's corpse too. Issei laid there, his body trying to stay alive as darkness crept closer into consuming his vision. Yet, he still lived. He couldn't understand how he was still alive with half of his head splattered across the room. He could see Mr. Morito's body above him, eyes blank in his death position. He wished he had come earlier. Issei would have tried to help them, but he had focused on his own energetic mindset for longer. Even as the darkness tried to consume his last amounts of light, he heard a familiar voice. "Issei." "No, Father Fried, why did you do that?" Issei felt his heart jump in his chest, hearing Asia like that. Panicking over his body, the shooter stood silent before he spoke up. "Those who are in devil's territory are sinners, no more, no less." The man, freed apparently, said with a vanity akin to a pretentious pope. But he wasn't one, he helped me. Issei pleaded his case. Fried sneered, one good deed doesn't absolve him of all the sins he's been born into. But Issei cried out, a thunk being heard as she hit the wall. Don't question your elders, girl, Fried said, voice sharper than steel, in fact, it's time for your confessional. Issei saw something slithering out of the shadows that creeped around his vision, spiked and snake-like. He had seen the shape before when Yuma had been there, he then winced. Something felt hot on his face. Then his vision returned, but it felt tainted. The wrongness only got worse as he felt pain surge through the right side of his blown-out skull, causing him to gasp aloud. Issei Argento was trying her best to get away from Fried Selzen, who was closing in on her. Then she heard Issei gasp, his body shuddering where it had fallen. Fried paused before turning, looking over his shoulder at the body. What on the Lord's green he started to speak before Issei moved. No, moved wasn't the correct word for it. It was like someone was trying to use Issei as a puppet but didn't understand what they were doing. His feet pressed against the floor as he rolled into a semi-standing position. His head flopping forward, hair covering what was left of his head as his arms hung uselessly at his sides. Fried pulled his light sword from his belt, activating the weapon. Seems he's also possessed by the legions of hell too, he said, a wicked grin forming on his face, it's time to exorcise it from his body. Issei's eyes widened as Fried moved with impossible speed, bringing his weapon down upon Issei's neck. Issei's right arm moved, intercepting the white blade. The blade stopped then cut through the arm at the elbow, the limb dropping to the floor with a soft thump. Fried looked amused, like people had done this before. Issei then lifted his head and Issei felt her stomach twist into a knot. Where Issei's right eye would have been, there was a glowing red orb. It floated in place, perfectly staying where it was. The vivid red glow seemed to seep into her soul as she stared at it, horror filling her before her first friend looked away from her and to Fried. Fried looked unaffected by the orb, but his body seemed to tense up. Seems we need to try harder, he stated before going for Issei's heart. Issei's left hand slammed into Fried's Adam's apple, causing the exorcist to stagger back as he couldn't breath. Issei watched in fascinated silence as Issei's arm then started to regrow, slowly at first before it got faster and faster. When everything but Issei's skin was regrown, black tentacles slithered out of the skin still on his arm. Issei. Issei murmured, watching in shock as his arm was covered in black, then grew armor of a dull golden luster. Fried seemed to have regained control over himself before glowering at Issei. He reached for his secondary weapon, a pistol that could fire off shards of light as projectiles. As he started to lift the weapon when Issei moved first, his right arm came up and unleashed a quartet of dim golden light. Fried was hit in the chest which sent him hurtling into the far wall, the wall actually cracking and groaning from the force of collision. As Fried's body hit the floor, Issei realized she was the only one that was awake with Issei. Issei's body shook as his arms dropped to his sides, his hair hanging over his left eye. The right eye, if one could call it that, was watching Fried with that alien redness that made Issei feel like her soul was shriveling under its gaze. Now, let it be known that Issei wasn't averse to wounds in general. However, she knew Issei couldn't be alive, standing there with the corpse of the older man behind him. The church had originally sent her to the healing centers of the exorcists, where she was able to use her blessing from the Lord to repair the damages the defenders of God had sustained. She had seen all sorts of wounds, as well as death. Many of those she had tried to heal had died soon after, due to other effects her blessing could not heal in any way. Several of the female exorcists had passed away from wounds that had been similar to Issei's own grievous one, though those women had thanked her before passing on. Issei was sure Issei was defying some natural law out there by simply being there with his head half missing. She wanted to get up and heal him herself, but something inside her kept her on the floor, like her limbs had been turned to stone by the Greek monster Medusa. Issei was in absolute hell. No, this was worse than hell itself. Issei knew he wasn't supposed to be feeling much, but it was beyond agonizing. His body's unnatural movements forced him to his feet, literally snapping his leg bones before repairing them once more. He felt the shard stabbing into his leg muscles before they disintegrated, new bones growing to replace the old bones. The agony was causing his legs to shake as he felt the wind blow into the insides of his skull, causing another wave of stabbing pain to rush through him. Despite having no pain receptors in the brain, it was like someone had purposefully grown some in his own brain to cause agony. Unable to move, he felt his brain being blown upon by the cool air. The hair he had left that touched his head would have caused Issei to wince and grit his teeth from the pinpricks of pain. Then Fried brought his sword down to cut Issei's head off. Issei couldn't make a noise as his right arm moved, intercepting the glowing white blade as it burned into his elbow. He couldn't scream as the blade sliced through the joint, the flesh smoking and black from the blade. He could also feel phantom senses going off as if his arm was still there, but he saw it wasn't. Something else seemed to have connected to his brain, giving him his vision back, but the right side of his vision was soaked in a blood like crimson. Then he felt something slithering under his skin, digging into his muscles in his left arm before that limb moved as well. It slammed into Fried's Adam's apple, actually breaking Issei's hand with the force needed to cause Fried to stumble back while choking. As his broken finger bones repaired themselves, he felt something stabbing through the stump of his right arm. He looked with his only real eye at his right stump. Coming out of the stump was a sharp bone that started to grow into a proper arm, muscles crawling up the white bone. He felt new nerves as they grew, sending painful signals back to what was left of his brain. Soon, his arm was all repaired, except it had no skin upon it. The cool air sent stabs of agony through him before he felt the skin on his upper arm being pulled off the muscles, internally screaming as this happened. Black tentacles snaked out of the rips, weaving into his freshly regenerated muscles. They pushed into the muscles then burrowed out, the pain magnified as more tentacles had joined the first few. Issei couldn't do a damn thing as his arm turned void black, the new skin flexing and rippling in the dim lights of the apartment. Then the top of his arm opened up, ripped open to allow large scales to slide out of the wound. The dull golden color of the scales reflected the dim light as they curled around his wrist and up his blackened limb, ending at where black skin met human skin. More scales appeared, sliding over the top of his hand as talon-like projections slid between his fingers. The scales come out more, covering the top of the wound with a single row of dull gold spines. Issei then felt two new wounds erupt out of his elbow as two horns pushed out of his skin and moved themselves to the back of the new gauntlet-like arm. The horns gave his healing elbow some protection as he felt the top of his hand open up. He wanted to empty his guts as he saw the three eyes, only one glowed vivid red as it moved around. He felt it moving in his arm, like his own eye would, and that was utterly unnatural. Then his fingertips exploded into pain so piercing it made him want to scream as claws roughly pushed through the black skin and into the light. Once it was completely done, Issei watched as Fried was sent into the wall from some sort of energy attack he had unleashed from his arm. Then he felt his brain starting to regrow, the wiggling of the gray matter sending revolting sensations. This was also followed by his skull starting to push the hole close, like a pair of jaws snapping shut. Muscles, veins and arteries slithered and crawled up his newly regrown bones. He felt it all, not being able to do a blasted thing about it. The red vision vanished, leaving him half-blind once more. But, only for a moment, as he could feel another eye regrowing in the newly reformed eye socket. Everything was returned to its proper and rightful place, the agony lingered in his body, but he had regained full motor control of it. He curled his hands into fists, hissing as the pain ran up his arms before he slowly walked over to Asia. "Hey, are you alright?" The word sounded forced, like he hadn't learned to speak before. Asia nodded before pouncing on him, pulling him into a bear hug. She was crying into his shoulder as she hugged him, Issei wincing as minor pain lanced through him. The ex-nun then pulled away, holding her hands before her as green light illuminated the tops of her hands. He felt the pain leave him, like she was removing it completely from his system. "We have to leave," Issei said, trying to get Asia to move when he heard something move behind him. Shoving Asia away from him, Issei spun around to find Fried standing on his feet. Fried had lost both his weapons, but he didn't look at all distressed. Instead, he looked rather amused as he rolled his neck and shoulders. "It seems the sinner needs to be put down before the devil can be removed," Fried said before leaping at Issei, "so be it." When Ria's Gremory felt the wards go off, she called her peerage as quickly as she could to her. It wasn't that easy to do as she thought as all of them were busy with their contacts tonight, so she wasted nearly 15 minutes waiting for them. When they all finally arrive, Ria's had Akeno create a transportation circle to take them to the apartment complex. The red glow enveloped them before fading away, Ria's taking stock of the situation. The couple that lived here were dead, their bodies were on the walls on makeshift crosses that made her skin crawl from the imagery. Devils had a weakness to anything holy, by the Christian standard that is. Ria's also realized that both had been Kiba's responsibility as they had gotten a contract with him, Kiba had a pretty good relationship with them. Ria's then spotted a young nun with her back against the wall, staring. She moved over to her and touched her shoulder. "Are you alright, miss?" she asked, causing the girl to jump. "I say," she gasped in Italian, grabbing frantically at Ria's clothing, "I have to help Issei." "The kendo," Ria's ordered her queen, motioning to the young woman, "You, Kiba and Kaneko get her out of here. Preferably at the orc, understand?" "Yes, Ria's," Akeno said before helping the girl to her feet and moving her to the exit. Ria's then heard something before running towards the sound, finding a hole in the wall before looking through it. What she saw made her heart jump into her throat. Issei Haidu was holding up Fried Selzen in the air with his left hand, the rogue exorcist was choking from the amount of pressure Issei was exerting on the man's throat. His right arm looked exactly like what Kaneko reported it to look like, down to the last detail. The scene also gave her a sense of wrongness she couldn't place until Issei turned slightly, aiming his body, so it was between Fried and the nun. Ria saw that both of Issei's brown eyes were glowing a vivid crimson red, both alien-looking eyes illuminating Fried's face in a bloody wash. Fried growled, trying to pull Issei's hand off his throat before Issei started to speak. "The worm like you doesn't even deserve to speak." He hissed, his tongue flickering out of his mouth like a lizard's. In fact, let's fix this problem here and now. Issei's right arm moved up and grabbed Fried's lower jaw, fingers curling around the teeth. Fried looked shocked and started thrashing, a vain attempt to free himself. Issei pulled, causing Fried to gasp in pain before his jaw started to bend. It was a slow bending as Issei forced it fully open, readjusting his grip before yanking it. One side of Fried's jaw snapped, tearing open his cheek while blood was sent everywhere. Issei hissed, maybe in annoyance, as he widened his stance. Using both arms, Riaz watched as Issei ripped the jaw free of the head. She nearly lost her stomach contents as she watched a bloody piece of human anatomy drop to the ground as Fried's mouth bled. The remains of Fried's cheeks hung in the air as Fried's tongue wiggled like a trapped worm on a hook. Issei's right hand snatched the wiggling flesh and tore it out of Fried's mouth as well. Fried dropped to the ground, gagging and gurgling as blood pooled under him. Issei stood over Fried before he shook, like he had been doused in cold water. He looked at Fried before he backpedaled, right into Ria's arms. Issei jumped then looked at her, his face so wide and haunted. He then collapsed to his knees and emptied his stomach as Riaz nubbly rubbed Issei's back. Riaz could only focus on helping Issei as he curled up, eyes squeezed tight as the backlash hit him. She couldn't fully come to terms with what she had seen either, her mind numb to the horror as she slowly got Issei out of there. The image of Fried's disfiguration haunted her thoughts for a good few minutes. It wasn't even the gore itself that caused the chills to run up her spine, but rather the absolute cruelty that the brutality had been carried out with, as if it was something he'd do 1,000 times without hesitation if he could. By the time she got Issei to the orc, Riaz knew one thing that she had to do. She had to get her brother involved. Issei may not be safe enough around Kuo anymore if he could harm another person like that. No one in Kuo would be safe from him if they drove him to anger. No, Issei had to be dealt with swiftly and immediately, she knew that. Upon entering the orc, Riaz helped Issei to a couch before hurrying off to her bedroom. Changing her clothing, she then created a transportation circle and stepped into it. She had to be quick or Issei may go on a rampage. Issei felt cold and numb. All he could see was the image of himself tearing off Fried's jaw, then ripping off his tongue. As he sat on the couch of the orc, he felt Asia hugging him, but he also didn't feel it. His body was so numb to anything as he tried to distance himself. The images of what he had done continued to rip through his mind until he felt a warmth fill him, the images seemingly to fade into the ether as he found Asia using her gift on him again. There, Asia said, nodding as she gave Issei a determined look, that should do it. Do what exactly? Asia sighed, should keep back the darkness I'm sensing within you. I seem to be able to hold it back. It's not something I think my gift would be able to do under normal circumstances, but it does. Issei looked at her strangely before looking around, realizing who else was with them. He found Akeno, Kaneko and Kibo all looking at him and Asia. All of them seemed rather on edge, like they knew something had just happened. He also noticed Riaz was missing, which also started setting off alarm bells in his head. Riaz never left without Akeno at her side, at least whenever he noticed the pair. Where is Riaz? Issei finally asked, looking around at the three. They didn't answer him, like they were waiting for him to explode. Issei didn't understand what had changed to cause such a reaction before understanding came to him, like getting hit in the gut. Riaz must have said something or they knew he had done something that made Riaz vanish. He was pretty sure that was the cause of this, but he couldn't be sure, but with Asia hugging him again, Issei wasn't going to do anything. Asia being next to him actually cleared his head a great deal, allowing him to think and go through what he was feeling. He felt turmoil and pain, revulsion and fear, worry and tiredness. What had his life come to? Surzich Lucifer was many things in life, war hero, leader of the new Satan faction, super devil, the inheritor of the Lucifer name as the king of hell. The panicker was, usually, not one of these things, except for example, if a close relative, say his little sister, came in looking like death had come to her front doorstep. Riaz barged into his office in a rush and almost sent them both onto the floor as she leapt into his lap, like she had done when she had been younger and much more easily frightened. This immediately set off major alarm bells within his head. Riaz? He asked, as Riaz pulled him into a rather tight hug as her body started shaking against his. What's wrong? And Ai-san, Riaz shuddered harder. Something has happened, I need your help. Surzich quickly sat up, holding his sister in his arms as he began to try and piece together what was going on. He was about to ask before Riaz got up, grabbing his hand and pulling him across his office towards the door. As soon as they left the office, Riaz created a teleportation circle and they both appeared in her bedroom in the orc building. Surzich was pretty sure his wife was going to come after him for this, but he knew Riaz needed help. Riaz then led him out of her room before they went down the stairs, Surzich taking it all in with a cursory glance. He spotted the rest of Riaz's peerage, all of them in a rather natural-looking attack pattern. On the couch was a young nun and the boy Riaz had told him about in personal letters. The room's air was tense and it seemed centered on those two. The nun was obviously an innocent bystander in all of this, given how tender her movements were while she took care of the boy. Besides, her pure aura made her less subtle than a children's book. As for the boy though. Just when he thought he looked like a harmless person, his gaze fell on his right arm. Thick yellowish scales ending with two sharp protrusions at the elbow, and once white claws stained by blood which had a rotten scent to it. Serzich's blinked in confusion before he narrowed his eyes, noticing a subtle detail someone with less apt senses could easily miss. At first glance, the boy's aura seemed small and invisible, like most regular humans. However, Serzich's could make out the outline of an energy source that affected the air around him with an ominous buzz. "Who is that, Riaz?" Serzich's asked, throwing his sister a side glance. She, however, did not reply nor look at him. Looking at her anxious, spaced-out gaze, the older devil figured his question hadn't even registered. Serzich's sighed and made his way towards the young man. All eyes were on him now. He saw how scared the boy himself looked, even more so than his sister. The nun's warm but protective glare just added to his confusion. He raised his hand and tried to gently palm the young man's head. "Excuse me, I just want to." A sudden, almost uncharacteristically fearful gasp left Serzich's lips the instant his fingers made contact with the young man's skin. Something had lashed out at him when he did that, and his body's first instinct was to back off. Subsequently, his reaction had the whole room shook and frozen. It was only natural as neither Riaz nor any of her servants had seen him ever show even a hint of fear. Looking back at the boy now, Serzich's noticed a very obvious change. Whereas the alien energy signature only left an outline, now it felt like it was baring its teeth at him or trying to. The boy's aura was utterly dark now, as black as the darkest black hole. It clung to his form like a parasite, multiple dark tendrils stabbed into his body. He didn't even realize it either, as the young lady that was hugging him so tightly was actually made of the purest light aura he had ever felt. It was said that even the darkest blackness gave way to a simple light. Was her presence suppressing whatever was inside of the boy? This young lady was so pure that the darkness's cold embrace felt fragile. As he looked closer at the parasitic manifestation, it looked right back. It took shape, shifting and morphing into a new shape. Shaped like a very thin wyvern, this shadow had a very long neck and multiple crimson eyes. It then roared at him, a hollow creepy sound. Bitty. Serzich's subtly unleashed a portion of his true power, zeroing it in on the parasite like a heat blast. The thing's menacing growls went silent, and the dark presence seemed to back off just a little, enough to give him some breathing room. Serzich's let out a breath he was holding and furrowed his brows. Something like this wasn't normal nor was it natural. Whatever this boy had within his soul, it had to be purged at once. He was thinking on just how to do that when the orc doors were forced open, causing Kiba to stumble from the force. "Serzich Lucifer," the voice came from a cloaked figure, one that made Serzich's tense up. "Step away from my son." Boru Haidu knew something was wrong the moment his son didn't come back from the short trip to the Meritos. That was the first sign. The second was the wards he had secretly erected around the residential neighborhood went off around the Merito residents, all of them warning about devils, a rogue exorcist and some unexplainable greater evil. He quickly got his old uniform back onto his body, his wife giving him a look of worry. "Better get your outfit on, too, dear." Goru said as he pulled his dark gray cloak over his shoulders. "Our son is in the middle of something I fear we should have expected." Miki was quick, clad in her former high priestess shrine kimono, faster than he had thought. His loving wife then took his hand as he finished putting his exorcist-grade holy energy saber on his belt before leading her towards where the wards had been set off. There, they found the Meritos had been killed, their murderer was slowly getting up off the floor. His lower jaw and tongue had been torn off, but that wasn't what caught Goru off guard. "Freed Selson," he snarled, eyes narrowing at the man with utter loathing. "I should have known." Miki moved first, her hand spread wide as she hissed, "By the unruly storms of Susanoo, the fierce thunders of Rajian, come to me lights of the gods." Lightning erupted out of her fingers, striking Freed Selson in the chest. The rogue was sent hurtling out of the apartment, smoke coming off of his burnt torso, crashing through the wall and onto the street. Boru looked at his wife, now remembering why she was such a dangerous woman in the first place. Miki had formerly been a Shinto shrine high priestess, blessed by the Shinto pantheon themselves to wield their immense power. Boru hadn't known that until he had accidentally caused an incident where Miki had started firing lightning at him like the fictional Emperor Palpatine. Boru then got alerted that someone powerful was at the orc building, grabbing his wife quickly before teleporting them there with some teleportation magic. Once the white glow of the circle faded, he rushed up the stairs and tried to open the double wooden doors. Both refused to budge, so he did the only thing he could think of, he kicked them open. Boru saw that he had made the young Udo Kiba stumble away from the doors, but no matter, he walked inside and spotted the source of the ward's warnings. The great Satan Serzich Lucifer was standing before his son, looking ready to do something. So, Goru acted. "Serzich Lucifer." Goru said in a cold flat voice, "Step away from my son." Surzich's shoulders tensed as he turned around to look at him, just as Goro was lifting his arms and pulling off his hood. Everyone stared at him before Mickey came in from behind him. She rushed over to Issei to make sure he was alright. Goro went straight over to the great Satan, grabbing his arm and yanking him into the kitchen. The action was so shocking that Surzich's couldn't even react properly and just let himself be pushed into the room. He blinked in silent confusion as Goro closed the doors behind them before motioning to a seat. "Sit," he ordered. The red-haired man gave him a "Are you serious?" look, but Goro paid him no mind, hand already in his pocket. "I have to make a few calls." Pulling out his old communicator, Goro put his old codes into it before putting it to his ear. It was silent before another voice came over the small device's speaker. "Goro? That is you, correct?" "Yes," Goro said, sighing. "Jameson, it's me." Jameson laughed. "Good to hear you, buddy. The guys were wondering where you and the beautiful Mickey Maiko ran off to." Goro smirked before that fell away from his lips. "Jameson, I need the top of the ladder on the comm, now. It's a code mad." Jameson stopped laughing, going all business. "Understood, she'll be on, or if not, just wait a bit." The line went static before another voice, a feminine and very motherly voice said, "Hello Goro Haidu. I believe you called for me?" "Yes," Goro replied, tone losing its energy. "I think I know where the sealed gear is. It's in my son, and Surzich is here as well. I'll be over in a moment, don't let Surzich near your son." The line went dead. Goro put the communicator away before looking at Surzich, who spoke up. "So, one of the latter-day Saint exorcists." Goro shrugged. "I was retired, but the current situation forced me out of retirement. It's even worse than I expected." Surzich raised his eyebrow. "Worse? Your son has something in him that is far more dangerous to everyone in Kuo than the Red Dragon Emperor would be." "My son is carrying something even more dangerous than any Dragon Emperor could ever do," Goro snapped before his shoulders sagged. "I just didn't realize it until now just what it was." "We all make mistakes," Goro, a new voice, the same one from his communication device, said at the head of the kitchen table. "It is what makes you human." The initial appeared in the orc's kitchen at the head of its table, wearing a simple robe of purest white. Her pure white hair was in a ponytail, as her eldest daughter loved it to be, as her bright gold eyes looked at Surzich Lucifer and Goro Haidu. Her many times great-grandnephew, through her second-born son Lucifer, looked very startled, afraid and uncomfortable in her presence. She dampened her aura greatly, allowing Surzich some relief as she looked at Goro. "I seem to have missed a great many things," the wife of Elohim said, motioning to the pair. "I wish to understand what is going on." Goro spoke up first. "Lady Eden, my son is carrying it inside of him. I didn't realize it until now because Mickey and I thought it was another sacred gear, like the Annihilation Maker. But we were both wrong." Surzich looked at Goro before asking, "What exactly is in his soul?" "Whatever it is, it clearly isn't strong." Eden cut him off. "Surzich, nephew, what you felt is only a fraction of its true power. What Issei Haidu has within his soul is a monster so terrible that it weakened my husband, who sealed it with his own life force to keep it locked away. What Issei has isn't a sacred gear, either, it's one of 3 sealed gears. Sealed on purpose to keep the monster from ever regaining its full power." Surzich looked absolutely floored at that, "But how is Issei still alive?" Eden snorted. "That thing is keeping him alive for its own uses, as long as it stays in one place, it can be tracked. That monster can easily jump from host to host without its host dying, unlike sacred gears." Goro sighed. "The LDS Church, as normal people know us by, knew of this problem due to our closer relationship with heaven. The church, the one in Europe, has been losing favor with heaven due to increasingly bad decisions and other problems." Surzich nodded, like he already knew of that issue. "Indeed, corruption is running the show instead of the faithful. I don't see that lasting long into the future at all." Eden nodded. "I'm tempted to shut it down, but many of the more faithful ones are the innocent people, so I can't. I'm also having Gabriel look into it personally, as Michael is handling other issues that aren't involved in the system." Goro sighed. "But what do we do about my son? He doesn't have a future where he will be sane long enough to be actually happy." Surzich shook his head. "I think you missed something on the way here, Goro. That young lady that has been clinging to young Issei has an aura so pure that it's shoving the monster back. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that was her soul shining through." Eden looked up, looking through the veil to see what Surzich was talking about and saw it. Little Asia Argento was hugging Issei Haidu like her life depended on it, but her soul. Oh, her soul. She couldn't help but smile as she looked at the young lady's soul. It burned with a pure brightness that outshone the sun at noonday. She was so innocent. "You did see her soul, nephew," Eden said, looking at Surzich after pulling out of the veil. "Her soul is so pure that it radiates out of her body." Surzich chuckled before his face turned grim, though, what do we do with Issei? Chapter 4. Introductions and Red Empress. When she, Goro and Surzich left the kitchen, Eden looked at the gathered room before taking a deep breath. This was going to be a rough discussion with everyone in this room, especially given the fact that they would be given the truth of many facts that were supposed to stay in the dark. She waved her hand, causing several chairs to appear into existence before motioning everyone to sit. Once everyone had a seat, with Mickey Haidu and Asia Argento sitting by Issei's sides, Eden spoke up, "Alright, we are going to address everyone here. What we are about to talk about is a rather broad crash course on the supernatural world in general, mostly for Issei's and Asia's understanding." Issei looked up, confusion written in his eyes as Asia tilted her head. "You both are taking your rather painful and dark first steps into a larger and more dangerous world. Issei has already learned this the hard way," Eden said with a sour note, giving the son of Goro and Mickey a sympathetic look. "Asia has faced trials that anyone other than her would have broken under. I cannot say I'm unfeeling, but everything that has happened is not something we can truly interfere with in a short term of time." The Kendo then spoke up, "And why is that?" Surzich shook his head as he picked up the explanation. "The supernatural world is made up of every mythological pantheon known to humanity, however, some have faded from our reality. Some of them are more powerful or much weaker than they are in the stories less powerful races tell about them, but you all are standing within the most violent of the many mythologies. The Christian pantheon, as we're famously called, is under MAD peacetime." Hineko blinked, mutually assured destruction. Boru sighed, two of the current leaders of the three factions are in this room, both of them can destroy millions of souls and entire continents with ease if they so wished. Azazel, the Grigori leader, is in the same boat as Lady Eden and Great Satan Surzich Lucifer. He clarified whilst tilting his head in their direction, bringing the room's attention back to those two. All three are the powerhouses of the Christian world. If all three went to war, then the earth would be nothing but an Ashen husk by the time they finished the first battle. That caused everyone, but the adults in the room, to look horrified at that implication. The three leaders of the three factions going to war and leaving only a broken world behind was horrific. Eden rolled her eyes at the way Goro deadpanned the statement as a fact. "Goro is correct," she admitted. "That is why I would prefer it if war never becomes an option. Between myself, Surzich and Azazel, we don't want to ruin this world because we got trigger happy." Surzich then spoke up, "The peace is maintained, and all groups are responsible for all the rogues and strays that appear due to our own failings. At least, that is the idea of this peace, but people don't follow the guidelines put down. But that isn't why we're here. We're giving you a general crash course." Issei held up his organic scale-covered right arm and looked at Surzich and Eden. "Do you guys know what this is?" Eden winced then spoke up, "An unnameable evil that came to Earth in the far-flung past. One of 3 sealed gears that escaped hours after the death of my husband." Asia's eyes narrowed. "Who is your husband?" Eden smiled sadly, feeling a phantom pain in her chest. "My husband was Elohim or Yahweh." Surzich winced while the others actually grabbed their heads in pain as she said 2 of God's names, being that they were holy and were quite powerful when spoken by someone like herself. She gave an apologetic look before using her powers to dampen the effects of the holiness if she ever spoke their words of power again. All the devils looked relieved while Asia looked shaken, but Eden got up and hugged the young girl. "Do not fear his death, young Asia Argento," Eden whispered to her, caressing her head in a motherly manner. "He died defending his family, something I hope you could remember him by. He loved his children, despite their failings, and would give his life again if he had to do so. He would have taken care of the church for excommunicating you like they did if he was still alive." Asia nodded before smiling with watery eyes. "I believe that, Lady Eden." Eden placed a kiss on her brow before allowing her to return to Issei's side, the boy looking more confused now. "But that doesn't explain what this great evil is." Eden shook her head and pointed at the scaled gauntlet. "That isn't the point, for we don't speak its name as it is in the old speech. A language that all deities know instinctively, but refuse to use it because of how powerful it is. Even the destructor Shiva refuses to speak in it, as he nearly caused the world to become a barren wasteland from nearly making a pronunciation mistake." Issei tilted his head. "Can't humans speak it without causing the power to happen?" Boru shook his head. "No, they can't. However, if they find another way to say a word, it could work, but we don't know if its name can be spoken in any other way. So, no nicknames or anything." Eden sighed. "Its true name's meaning is many who eternally hunger, but I cannot elaborate further without digging up darker memories of the past. Suffice to say, this beast was the first my husband sealed before the Trahixa." Eden shuddered, remembering the day that the monster came and rained havoc upon the planet. Tearing reality apart with its eldritch powers, her eldest son had to keep her from joining her husband in the heat of battle. She pulled her memories away before retaking her seat, motioning for Surzich to continue. "Currently," Surzich said, "the most powerful pantheons to date are the Hindu, followed by the Norse. Then we have our pantheon, Christianity, followed by the Shinto, who have generally more authority on these grounds than we do." Mickey smiled, nodding her head. "The Shinto prefer a more hands-off approach, but don't slack off in the power department." Surzich nodded, "Indeed. Anyway, last but not least are the Greeks, only barely surpassing the Chinese. Everyone looked contemplative as the information sunk in before Guru spoke up seriously. The Christian pantheon is also split, a sad reality, but one nonetheless. The Christian Church and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints split away from one another years ago due to internal issues from the way things should be run to religion itself. Now, I don't want to boast as it may sound like it, but the LDS Church has grown, while the Church in Europe has started to fall into deeper corruption than ever before. As of right now, the LDS Church has been forced to handle everything the regular Christian Church can in terms of manpower and dealing with internal issues. Strays and the rogues, so we're spread quite a bit over the planet because the others can't do it. Just like the Americans. Surzich snorted, more likely, your military budget is actually reasonable and well planned out because you got Jesus helping you budget it out. Boru shrugged, only Lady Eden knows that much, I'm retired, remember. Eden shook her head, not for much longer, I'm going to ask you to return from your retirement to help your son with learning his place in this larger world. From heaven all the way to the underworld Hades calls home, he has to know. Boru bowed his head, understood, I'll activate my chip tomorrow and station myself here in Kuo. Mickey held her head and sighed with the weariness of an overworked employee. I thought we could get away from all the craziness of the supernatural, but it seems like we can't. Riaz frowned, but asked, why did you hide here anyway? Boru chuckled, hiding in plain sight, you didn't notice us nor did Sona. It was quite easy to hide our past lives from everyone, but we're going to have to bring them out sooner than we hoped. No truth stays hidden forever, I suppose. The man exchanged a sentimental look with his wife who smirked slightly in response, though the curl of her lips didn't reach her despondent eyes. Issei blinked before looking up at Eden and Surzich, what about me? I seem to be at the center of this mess. Eden smiled, very astute of you, Issei Haidu. Yes, you are at the center of this web of chaos, but in the end, you may be our only hope in stopping this great evil once and for all. I'm sure you know the evil as it's been in your dreams every night, hunting you constantly. Issei only nodded, but why? Eden sighed, you are its perfect host, all the others were simply tools to be used to find you. Heaven has been trying to track down its path, but due to its randomness, we lost it around the 3rd or 2nd century. It turns out it had jumped into the underworld where the devils lived. Many of the young generation of that time were jumped, used then discarded, left mentally scarred or irreparably damaged. The last one we actually knew of before it jumped away was Riser Phoenix, but we don't know the extent of the damage. Surzich grimaced, he was a rather promising young lad, but then something changed and it only grew worse over time. Sadly, that's water over the dam at this point. Boru stood in motion to his wife, Issei and Asia, come, it's late and I believe we are going to be welcoming a new family member tonight. Asia's eyes went wide in shock at that before bowing low to Guru, thank you. Boru gently helped her back into a standing position, giving her a warm smile, no need for that. Also, you can call me Pops or Guru. Glancing at his wife then, his smile turned into a sly smirk, ooh or, you could be the second person to call me daddy. Mickey, growling, zapped his rear for the quip. Ouch. The man yelped in pain, comically jumping 4 feet into the air. Your dirty humor is out of touch, old dog. Mickey chided him with an unamused glare. I've gotten rusty, haven't I? Might have to prove myself tonight, then. Replied Guru, rubbing his chin in naughty thought. See can you not in front of the kids and the literal leaders of heaven and hell. Guru put his hands up innocently, chuckling with sweat on his face. Hey, I was just trying to lighten the mood a little, okay? You looked pretty tense back there. One hand on her hip and the other raised with charged electricity, Mickey glared at him more intensely, though her cheeks were noticeably puffed and reddened. Asia's soft laughter cut through the air, grabbing their attention. The two elder Haida stared at her and then back at each other, exchanging awkward smiles. Asia only smiled as she and Issei's family left, leaving the devils alone with Eden. Eden looked at them all before she spoke up, her voice calm and soft. Riaz Gremory, she said, I know you fear Issei and believe me, we all share your feelings at what he might potentially become if that beast of old has its way with him. Nevertheless, I want you know, I need you to try your best to help him. He's only just started his journey into the world you grew up in, he needs friends and allies to help him as he suffers through that evil's prison. He will fall under that monster's spell without allies to help him, and he won't live long enough to actually be able to do what he has to do. Riaz squared her shoulders, you knew what he did to that rogue. Eden nodded, I saw it in heaven, it was how I know it was here in Japan. It has been hiding itself quite well since it left the underworld. But if it can be kept inside of Issei, we can figure something out to fully destroy it. Uriel is busy scouring the earth for anything that could eliminate this threat to all of planet Earth completely. Riaz sighed, her head drooping, I don't think I can help him after what I saw, but I'll see if my peerage can help him. Eden nodded before turning to Surzich, nephew, I think it would be best to get Riaz to a counselor for a while. What she saw wasn't at all pretty nor was it enjoyable. Surzic stood before gently pulling Riaz against him. I'll take her to one immediately. Eden bowed her head, stepping back as both siblings vanished in a flash of red light. She then turned back and looked at Riaz's peerage before smiling. I would suggest you all get ready for bed, you have a busy day of school tomorrow, and I don't think you want to pull an Issei now, do you? Alright, you heard the bell, now get to the showers. I expect all of you to practice those moves as we have a tournament coming up soon in Kyoto. Yes sensei. Naima sighed as all of the kendo club left the gym, wondering if she had really put the proper foundation into the young ladies she was teaching. It wasn't something she thought possible, but given the academy's spotty past, she wasn't surprised that some of the girls thought she was some cougar. That had actually set her off, causing all of the girls to exercise without doing any sword katas for several weeks. Sure, she was an exotic bombshell, but that didn't mean she was going out for sex every night with some high school student. She stopped those thoughts from spiraling out and calmed herself, taking deep breaths as she released her growing anger. It was something she had practiced and it came easily as the anger left her and she was herself again. Thankfully, she caught it early this time or she'd been in a foul mood all night. She picked up her wooden Adachi-style bookend before heading to the teacher's shower, a personal boon if you ask her. She pulled off the white robe, placing it on a hook before unwrapping the chest bindings. Her huge breasts came out of the bindings as she winced, given that she was not used to the tightness she had on them at all. She then removed her panties and stepped into the shower, turning on the warm water that ran down her sensual form. Greg, she said aloud, pressing her hands against the wall where the shower head poured water onto her. Do you think these girls actually have a chance in the tournament? I would rate them a solid A for effort, but only Cadis and Murema have a ghost of a chance in taking it to the top. The voice of the Welsh Dragon Emperor said, a soft green light flashing in time with his words under the skin of her left hand. She grimaced before sighing. No kidding, she remarked, reaching for the soap. They seem more interested in beating the pervertedness out of the perverted duo instead of actually practicing properly. Doesn't help that you're the wet dream of every young man in this school. Drake remarked slyly, causing Naima to scoff. Not my fault that I have trouble with my clothing either being too tight or too easy to see through after a long day of teaching. I know, Drake said, laughing, I have been with you for nearly 11 to 12 years, Naima. You are the only host to actually have had me for the longest. Naima sighs, this statement hit her hard. She was one of the only hosts of Drake to actually survive longer than a few years, the others having been killed due to strain the boosted gear caused them or going into Juggernaut Drive. She hadn't let herself fall into that trap as she was alive and well today. Though, given her history, it had taken her some time before she had gotten control over the immense powers that the boosted gear gave her. Lathering herself, Naima quickly rinsed off her body before getting the shampoo and doing her dark locks of hair. Once that was done, she turned off the water and dried herself off. She spotted the wall-length mirror and looked at herself in it. Drake hadn't been wrong about her being a teenager's wet dream, she also had a body that placed her in the cougar category. Huge breasts, wide child-bearing hips, long legs with thick thighs. A flat belly with only a faint outline of abs, an ass that jiggles when she walks, her exotic dark skin that seemed to only get more exotic when she was in tight clothing or something wet. She grimaced before putting her regular clothing on, using some dragon fire to dry her hair, before picking up her items and leaving the school. She was quiet on the way home, thinking about the students that needed more exercising when she smelled something. It was tinged with the scent of iron and something else, her enhanced nose barely even picking it up at all. Naima turned her head to see where she was in relation to her apartment, which was only a short walk away. Sighing, she quickly rushed to her apartment and put her stuff on the couch. This had better not be another stray, she muttered, summoning the crimson sacred gear before closing the door behind her as she left the apartment. They've been getting rather brave showing up around a school full of innocent children. Greg huffed his agreement, indeed, if it is another stray, we'll deal with them like the others. She nodded, more to herself as she climbed up the side of the building and called forth the balance breaker of the boosted gear. The armor formed around her body, taking the shape of a crimson scaled dragonoid armor. But hers was different from the regular scale mail, as hers had some samurai influences on it. The helmet had the most samurai influence on it, as it was shaped like the helmet of a samurai, but had dragon horns coming out of the top. She twisted, making sure no one was up here before spreading her armor's wings and taking flight. The setting sun reflected off her crimson armor as she flew to where the scent of that iron had been, landing near an alleyway that had the strongest scent of it. The helmet vanished in a soft red glow as she crouched down to inspect one of the walls. The wall had a dark red streak across it, dried. She looked at another section of the wall and found a much fresher streak, fresh human blood. Her helmet reformed over her head as she slowly moved down the alleyway, keeping her senses sharp for anything. Naima stopped, spotting two boukins on the ground, one of them having the blade snapped in two. She also spotted two school bags, both of them belonging to Cadis and Murema. They got my students, she snarled, her voice taking on a dragon-like quality, they will pay. They may only be one, dragon toned sharply. Focus, Naima, don't let your anger cloud your rational thinking or make you cocky. Understood. Naima moved as quickly as she could down the alleyway, following the new sense of her students, until she found an abandoned warehouse bordering near the older section of Kuo. She entered the large building through a hole in the wall, checking out her surroundings. What she found was a lot of empty crates, a few hundred industrial-grade metal poles stabbed into the ground, and a lot of chains hanging from the ceiling. A few of them also carried the bodies of dead men, women and children. This one has been getting around, Drake said in disgust, quite well fed too by the looks of it. Naima made note of that before moving deeper into the warehouse, taking her time to stay silent as she got closer to the center. Then she started noticing nearly transparent threads hanging in the air, many were woven between the chains and connected to the metal poles in the floor. She started feeling chills run up her spine as she noticed a few huge webs that looked like they belonged to an arachnoid monster of some size she couldn't determine. "Welcome to my parlor," a rather youthful but dark voice hissed in the darkness, said the spider to the fly. Naima stopped, looking around for the sound of the voice. She didn't see it, nor did she hear any more of the voice, nothing stirred within the darkness. She waited, then started to move forward again before she stopped dead in her tracks once more. Above her, the moonlight shining upon them, was her students. Both were wrapped up in a bondage-like style that emphasized their growing bodies. She gritted her teeth as she wanted to fly up and save them, but she didn't know her enemy that well, and this could be a trap. Given that she was surrounded by web-like strands, it had to be something like a spider. Her question was answered when she was struck from behind, sent flying into a pile of crates which exploded into splinters. Naima groaned as she got onto her hands and knees, the armor's tail twitching behind her as she growled under her breath. She hadn't planned for her enemy to sneak up behind her, which was her mistake. "It seems like little Shiranisha found a little hero out tonight," the voice said, sounding much older than before. "I hope the hero is ready to play for keeps." Naima caused the armor to create the thrusters that lifted her onto her feet before disintegrating into red particles as she turned and faced her opponent. "I'm only playing to keep innocence out of your jaws, stray," Naima said flatly, studying the stray before her. The stray had the body of a young woman, but her skin was extremely pale. Her huge bust was only covered by a single ribbon that wrapped over her shoulders and around her back to cross over to the other breast. A wrap was tightly done around her body where her breasts ended and where her rather visible abs began. It also had a cloth that wrapped over her more intimate parts, though it was so tight, it left nothing to the imagination. Her feet and lower thighs were covered in sock-like clothes, but they were soaked in blood. Probably from her victims, if Naima guessed, as her talon toes were dripping with freshly drawn blood. Her clawed fingers were stained crimson, but the rest of her body was paler than white fresh snow, which didn't fit with the rest of her. Her glowing yellow-green eyes stared at Naima with an animalistic hunger, but it was tapered by a keen intelligence of a well-practiced hunter. Her black hair, or in actuality, black writhing mass of tentacles held her up. 4 of the thickest, strongest and longest tentacles held her up in the air. Shiranisha then rubbed one of the long tentacles as it started leaking a clear fluid before it flicked it away, causing a thin line of webbing to connect to a large crate full of screws and nails. "All I see is an armored trespasser now," Shiranisha snarled before attacking Naima with a speed that belied her seductive pale frame. "Who needs to die?" The tentacle that held the web line yanked on it, sending it into Naima. The crate slammed into her, knocking her off her feet as the screws and nails scraped crimson off her armor. Sparks also flew as metal scraped against metal as she slammed heavily onto the floor. Naima got up, having to defend herself as the stray got up close and personal. Claws slashed across the helmet but didn't leave a mark. Naima went in for a punch of her own, but the stray devil dodged, twisting herself out of the way far faster than anything she had ever fought. "Brag," Naima hissed, swinging herself around, trying to kick the stray. "Need options here." Brag was silent before shouting, "Punch right." Naima threw a punch right, slamming a fist into the stray and sending her into one of the warehouse's support beams. Her body dented the beam upon impact as Naima got up and charged at her. She didn't want her evading her attacks anymore. Wrist blades. Blades. Twin blades slid out over the top of the right arm's gauntlet like the fictional predator species. The golden-colored blades flashed in the moonlight before Naima brought them down, slashing into Shiranisha's side as the stray pounced on her. Purple blood sprayed out of the twin slash wound before a foot slammed into the side of Naima's helmeted head, slamming her face first into the concrete floor. Dazed, the Red Dragon Empress didn't even register the next impact as she was sent flying into her own support beam. Instead of denting it, she snapped it in half before hitting the floor. "Ow," she groaned, getting up as she shook her head. The only reason she was still up was because of her training and the armor defending her. That hurt. Shiranisha's gaze was on her wound before she looked at Naima with disgust, one hand on her wound to stem the bleeding. The violet ooze covering her pale skin in its unnatural color, yellow-green eyes narrowing in hate. "You actually hurt me," she hissed darkly. "Maybe I should hurt you back." Naima got ready for the attack, ready to summon another bladed weapon, when Shiranisha leapt into the rafters above. With her prey in darkness, Naima had to rely on her other senses, but that wasn't helping her as the sounds came from everywhere. Where is she? She hissed to herself as she tried to pinpoint her opponent. That was until a sharpened metal pole nearly skewered her, thrown from the darkness of the rafters. Naima had dodged in time to see the point spark her boot plate, thankful that she didn't have her armor be skimpy where it counted. The horrific screech followed as the stray came at her again, holding another spear-like pole in her hands that was covered in dried blood. Damn it, she cursed, having to use her wrist blades to angle the sharpened end of the spear away from her body. She's way too fast. Might I suggest actually playing to your strengths? Perhaps a sword. Drake countered. Fine. Adachi. Blade. Naima's prize weapon, an adachi she had forged herself under a swordmaster, appeared in her right hand. Crimson armored fingers closed around it before she brought it around, her strength allowing her to easily one-hand the huge two-handed samurai-age sword. Shiranisha's look of surprise turned to horror as the blade sliced through her belly, then her arm, blood pouring out of both wounds as she fell to her knees. Panting, Naima felt winded, though that might have been the adrenaline leaving her body. Standing up straight, Naima looked at the stray before frowning. Shiranisha looked more upset than actually hurt, despite the growing pool of blood beneath her might suggest. That was until her tentacles sent her flying into the darkness above, forcing Naima to follow with her thrusters. The rafters were covered in webbing, much to Naima's displeasure. That wasn't the worst of it, most of Shiranisha's victims' cadavers were up here in cocoons of webs. Naima held her weapon at the ready, but Shiranisha didn't attack, in fact, she wasn't anywhere to be seen. Her nose picked up the purge smell of the stray's blood, which she followed until it stopped. Naima spotted Shiranisha hanging over a pit that was covered in multiple webs, looking at her stump of an arm. Naima wasn't sure what she was doing until a new limb erupted out the wound, covered in the same fluids as her webs. There, the stray cooed, feeling her new arm, good as new. Though, she'll need the true treatment. Naima was about to get ready for Shiranisha to turn and attack her, but the female monster didn't seem to notice her, in fact, she didn't move from her spot. Until her body started to split in half, blood splattering the webs as the two halves fell away. Naima nearly voided her stomach as the new monster got up. It was nearly 20 feet off the ground, standing on 6 spider-like legs. Underneath those were 4 large breast-shaped mammaries that were oozing and leaking the clear fluids her tentacles had secreted. Her legs and mammaries were on the bottom of her abdomen, which didn't look right for Naima. Neither did her abdomen end in a spinneret, but a pink fleshy opening that had bell tentacles writhing and wriggling in and out of it. A humanoid body was conjoined on the front, on a little muscular neck-like connection. On it was a feminine body that had a pink fleshy vagina that oozed dark fluids from itself, as the body had 2 large breasts that also secreted the same fluid as the webbing. A pair of well-defined arms that ended in clawed fingers ran up her belly and over her breasts, getting her hands covered in the fluids before her fingers started creating nets from the webbing fluid. Her face was covered in multiple yellow-green eyes of various sizes, her mouth was multiple mandibles, as her neck was thick and heavily armored in chitin-like plates. Under her arms were a pair of limbs that looked like scythe blades, held like a praying mantis would hold them. Where her thighs would have been, another pair of scythe arms were hanging limply against the skin. Naima had no reason to doubt they could be used as well. Naima acted, igniting her adachi and sliced through the first connection of the large web. That got Shiranisha's attention quite quickly, and the monster roared, mandibles spreading wide. The dark blue-violet skin rippled as Shiranisha threw her first net at Naima, who dodged and slashed through another connection. The web shuddered, the continued loss of connections not helping it with Shiranisha's weight above it. The eldritch horror snarled before leaping at Naima, grabbing her in one large clawed hand and slamming her into one of the structure supports. Naima felt the armor becoming compromised as the stray squeezed her harder. "I got you now, trespasser." Shiranisha hissed, holding up her hand to stab her claws through Naima's head. Naima grinned as she quickly gathered energy into her palm before grunting out, "Dragon Lancer." The sphere lanced out, becoming a beam as she cut the room with it. Debris exploded outwards as metal beams melted, concrete exploded, and wood was burnt to ash. All the webbing connections failed as Shiranisha roared in shock, her weight carrying her into the dark abyss below, as well as freeing Naima. Her armor's wings unfurled as Drake took control and flew Naima out of the collapsing nest of the stray. "Drake," Naima said tiredly, "remind me to never fight a stray like that again, okay?" Naima groaned as Drake laughed as she took control, flying over to both of her best students and freeing them. Once freed, she carried them out of the building in her arms. She nearly collapsed from how tired her body felt, though that might have been from being nearly squeezed to death as well. Once in the alleyway, Naima got to their school bags and found their spare training robes. She put them on their forms before letting the balance breaker armor fall, before looking back at the warehouse. Lifting her left arm, the boosted gear appeared again as flames surged out of her palm. Bright emerald green flames that consumed the warehouse and everything in it. By morning, it would be nothing but ash. There, if she survived that inferno, then I'll have to properly burn her alive, Naima said, worn out and not in the mood for another fight for another month. When the four finally returned back to the Haidu household, it was in somber spirits. Even with the information they had been given, it wasn't hard to see why that would be the case. Issei was being hugged from both sides by Asia and his mother as Goru opened the door before motioning them all in before himself. When they entered, Goru stepped inside before closing the door behind him. "Well, I would have preferred to keep you out of the world you were born into," he said before hugging his son, pulling him from his mother and Asia. "I guess fate has firmly declared you a part of it like myself and your mother." Issei only nodded before frowning, looking up at his dad. "What are you and mom exactly?" Goru chuckled. "I wish I could just say a very happily married couple, but that's obviously not an appropriate answer right now." He then guided everyone to the living room and motioned them to have a seat, himself taking a seat in the recliner. "I'm an exorcist." "Well," Goru shook his head, "not exactly what we call ourselves. We are called guardians, for we do the jobs that the guardian angels of heaven do, but they can't always be there. So we handle the cracks and gaps they can't be in, helping those in need. Not just killing the monsters of the world 24/7. Asia raised her hand, "But why differentiate yourself even more from the church? Don't you both do the same thing?" Mickey took up the explanation. "They don't, not anymore. They split from the church and stationed themselves in America because of the corruption that had taken hold in the leaders of the church. Then they had more divine inspiration from the firstborn son of heaven, which led them in a more direct path with what heaven actually wanted. However, it's pretty upsetting how things have gone because of corruption." Asia looked at her lap at that explanation, looking like a wilted flower. Issei wrapped an arm around her, and that seemed to cheer her up as she leaned up against him. "Your mother," Goru continued, "was the Shinto faction's high shrine priestess. She grew up in Kyoto where she learned to commune with the Shinto deities and use their powers until she fell in love. Which also should have cut her off from the power itself, but the deities blessed her with their gifts." Mickey smirked. "I regret nothing in my decision to marry you, dear." Goru nodded as he reached over and took his wife's hand. "Not only that, you married a Japanese American from a different religion." Mickey giggled. "Oh, how my parents were so determined to scare Goru off for being a Mormon heretic. They actually tried to shoot him once, but Goru shot the gun out of my father's hand and told them that he wouldn't stand it if I got hurt because they were angry over some misunderstanding in the ancient past. I soon left after that and came to America and we got married in the Salt Lake Temple." Goru and Mickey seemed to be remembering the old times before Goru came back to himself and looked at the two teens in amusement. "Now, it's time for bed, you two. You both have school in the morning, and I would hate for you two to miss the first day that Asia is there." Halwarner slammed her hand into the back of a bench, cracking the wood with the force of her punch. Things were going downhill faster than she expected, and it was infuriating. Not only that, Fried had pulled a disappearing act after taking that stupid girl out for some in-field experience. As she started to try and calm herself down, Donaseek walked up to her, breathing shallowly from the chest wound that was still covered in bandages. "Why is everything not going according to plan?" She snarled under her breath, glowering at Donaseek as her aura rippled out of her. Donaseek grimaced, putting a hand to his chest. "Cool it, still injured from that brat. I also got something that may help us complete this task." Halwarner looked at Donaseek, motioning him to continue. "Millet has come back from surveillance and found out where the kid lives," the fallen angel grunted. "Not only that, the girl is with a family." Halwarner frowned. "So, two regular humans, a freak of a human and our target." Donaseek nods. "Not only that, it seems that we can easily take them." Millet suggested caution as she got an unusual feeling from the parents. Halwarner grunted before looking at the bench. "Get a large raiding party prepared, a few dozen exorcists, and only a dozen fallen. 1 or 2 magicians as well. I want wards to keep people from noticing what we're doing. Tomorrow is the blood moon, and we need to extract that gear that night or we will not get another chance until next year. Our glorious leader would rather obliterate us than wait for that long, so we better get this right the first time." Donaseek nodded, tipping his hat before walking off. "Then I shall make final preparations." With that declaration, he disappeared into a puff of black feathers. Chapter 5. Invasion and Blood Moon. The next day found the newest student of Kuo Academy joining the ranks of the students there. Most were immediately enamored with her, but when they saw her stick close to Issei, their jovial smiles and gasps of awe turned into surly sneers and hateful glares, as if his mere presence was somehow defiling the pure maiden. Thinking about it, Issei thought it funny how their mistrust in him wasn't technically unjustifiable, even though none of them knew the truth. He felt rather indifferent to the threatening looks as he led Asia to his classroom. They would be in the same year, so it was a rather nice experience to actually be able to understand what was properly being said in class. Asia's gentle aura pushed back the darkness that creeped at the back of his mind as school rolled on. Then they had PE, something Issei had not participated in often due to his medical history. The PE class wasn't that large either, most of the athletic kids were in various clubs. Most including but not limited to kendo, track, swimming, baseball, softball, basketball and so forth. The regular PE class was a class that the second years had to take before they would either join a club or continue on to the harder PE class that came in third year. Given that this was Issei's first class with Miss Naima, he was surprised at how small the class was. The teacher was standing in the center of the basketball court in a pair of workout shorts and a tight running top that covered everything needed. Her midriff was free and showed off the faint outline of a six-pack. A whistle hung around her neck and a towel over her left shoulder. "Welcome, students," she said, giving them all a cursory look over. "Now, before we start, I want to announce to any of the Kendo Club members here that the Kyoto Kendo tournament is in a few months' time. I expect you to actually be training your hardest for that, given that Private Aichi Symbiosis Academy is still holding the record over us for Kuo's past 8 tournaments." That got all the students hissing as the thought of the Kyoto Private Aichi Symbiosis Academy, the long-hated rivals of the Kuo Academy. Unlike Kuo Academy, rumor had it that the Aichi Symbiosis drove their male students into being effeminate and adopting female identities, while the women got weapons to defend themselves. Only 5 of the top students got actual swords, though there were rumors that only one guy actually kept his male identity recently. Issei was pretty sure that something unnatural was keeping the Kyoto government from acting against the academy, like magic or something even more sinister, if the rumors were in fact true. He wasn't fully sure, but it smelled completely fishy to Issei, and he was pretty sure that Riaz and her peerage knew this too. But the rivalry had gone even further back to when both academies were female only. The rivalry had become national when it was shown live in Japanese televisions nearly 40 years ago. Ever since then, it has become a national pastime for everyone to tune into the Kuo Aichi tournament battles. If anyone even breathed the victories that Aichi had, they would be nearly crucified by the student body. Both men and women of the academy all agreed that Aichi was the greatest evil. As Issei felt Asia get closer to him as it seemed the room temperature dropped before Naima blew her whistle, shattering the building rage in an instant. She then pointed at the obstacle course she had set up around the court before speaking loudly. "The only reason I see you all not moving is because you decided to stew in your anger at your rival. I suggest you put that anger to good use. Go through this course 4 times, by the time you're done, I expect you all to be ready to learn something." She blew the whistle again, and the class seemed to move as one, all charging the obstacle course like a herd of wild buffalo. When Issei got to the first obstacle, he barely had time to register the fact of what it was until he was shoved aside and something snapped. The pain didn't even register, but Asia's screams of horror did as he looked down and saw his left leg was bent in the entirely wrong direction. That scream also made most of the students pause as Issei started to feel the pain register as he went to grab his leg before a hand stopped him. Looking up as tears filled his eyes, he saw Naima was above him, looking him over with a rather intense look of worry. "Everyone," she barked, getting everyone's attention, "keep doing the obstacle course until I get back. And if any of you start creating rumors about this, I'll be sure you get even more exercise time than you even want." She then picked Issei up as he winced in agonizing pain as she moved him as gently as she could to the nurse's office. The only thoughts running through his head were what in the world had happened and if Asia was going to be alright. Naima had not expected this to happen to her, but when Issei Haidu was shoved aside by one of the older women into the lowest hurdle, she could only watch as his left leg snagged, then snapped loudly. That seemed to silence everything in the court. The newest student, Asia Argento, then screamed. That had brought Naima back to reality as she rushed over to Haidu, and she was at his side instantly, looking over the wound. The left leg had twisted and snapped out of its socket in the hip, now limply laying on the floor as Issei went to go touch it. She stopped him, getting a closer look before telling her class to continue doing the obstacle course. She would get back to them later, right now she had a rather injured student to deal with. Carrying him to the nurse's office, Naima put Issei on the single bed in the rather spacious room before noticing someone had followed her. Asia Argento had followed and was instantly at Issei's side before her hands were at Issei's broken leg. Naima was about to stop them when a green glow covered the young girl's hands and Issei's leg started to repair itself. In only a few moments, Issei's left leg was back to normal as Asia grimaced before hugging Issei tight enough to crush a bear. Asia nodded before turning to look at Naima, who was rather taken aback at the suddenness of the entire thing. She may be the Red Dragon Empress, but something like that injury should have taken Phoenix Tears or particularly powerful healing magic. She had never once seen a sacred gear heal that quickly or effectively. Issei then groaned, "I think we may have done this in the wrong place, Asia." Asia blinked in confusion, "What do you mean?" Issei pointed at his healed leg. "Leg injuries like mine don't just repair themselves that quickly." Naima put a hand against her forehead as she sighed, "I can fix it, but what in the world happened, you two?" She said this last part with her teeth grinding together, frustration welling up inside her. Asia shakily answered, Issei has a monster inside of him that left him a mean surprise to inflict pain upon him. Naima looked at Issei, a monster, are you serious? Issei glowered at her, you apparently know about the supernatural world if you are acting like Asia is lying, Sensei Ima. Naima felt like she had been slapped with that remark before the top of her left hand started to laugh. She lifted it and glowered at the glowing circle, not at all amused. He has you there, Naima Drake laughed, clearly smiling at the situation, I told you that you needed to work on your acting skills a bit longer. Shut up, you overgrown lizard. Naima hissed before looking at the pair, I can handle the memory modification, making it so you only got a rather nasty scrap. That good enough? Both nodded before Issei got off the table, as Naima said, I want you both out of the course until the end of the class. In case this monster left any more surprises in your body. Yes sensei. The kendo frowned as she walked up to Issei and Asia during lunch, her senses on edge since last night. But as she walked up to them, she noticed how comfortable Issei looked around Asia. It was like Asia gave Issei some sort of peace he never had before, something that Akeno felt she could have given if she hadn't stayed away from much of the population of the school due to her rather valid issues. Such as the Kuo-rumor mill, which she hated with a passion. Rumors seemed to appear with every step she took, something she wanted to blast away with her electric-based powers, but couldn't as that would mean harming the humans that were innocent. Such a tight line she must walk while up here, which made her restless. That didn't help her, so she had to release her energies in other ways, like teasing. Hello, Senpai Himejima, the young lady said, waving Akeno over to their little spot next to the trees, please come sit with us. She could hear the rumors flying, but she ignored them as she smiled and made her way over, purposefully putting a sway in her hips that made Issei look her over. That made her smile widen a fraction. Of course, Akeno said with a giggle, why wouldn't I sit with one of the cutest young girls in Kuo Academy? Asia blushed completely red as Issei smiled as he moved back a bit to allow Akeno some room to sit with him. Akeno sat and got her food out as she looked at the pair, taking in their details for later. Asia's blush was fading, but her blonde bangs framed her heart-shaped face with startling green eyes that screamed of pure innocence. Issei, on the other hand, looked at her with his brown eyes that spoke of newly released freedom. His face had a sunken look, but it was getting healthier, smiling more as the bags under his eyes didn't seem to exist anymore. As he ate, he seemed to lean towards Asia before something shifted in the air between her and him. She felt it and so did Issei, from the look of surprise he gave her. Akeno only smiled before taking a bite of her food, not saying anything as Asia talked about her new friends in the class Issei was also in. Akeno felt a spark inside her, one that came from Issei himself. It was like he was a storm waiting to be unleashed upon his enemies, lightning only lying dormant for Issei to call upon at a moment's notice. For Akeno, whose entire being could turn into that very natural plasma energy, it was like Issei was pulling her to him. Akeno felt like energy being pulled into a powerful storm and being surrounded by other energies. It was a rather warm feeling, but it was also alien, like the clouds were alive in some fashion. But with Asia being so close, it was like that alien feeling couldn't get a hold of her or hang on. It was quite funny, but everything came to an end. The bell rang and everyone was packing up their lunches. Asia looked rather put out about it however. Don't worry. Akeno told her, patting the young lady's head. We can do this tomorrow as well. Oh okay. Asia nodded as Issei led her back to the school, followed by Akeno, who was only a few steps behind them both. After the last bell rang and the students were let out, Issei felt rather put out. It wasn't like he expected much from having something resembling a normal day, that would have been crazy. But after that PE class, he wasn't so sure on whether he should expect many good things to happen. Asia and Issei were walking home when Asia asked him something unexpected. Issei? Am I worth something? Issei was caught off guard at the question. Given by Asia herself and in such a timid manner, it was rather unsettling for the boy. What could have caused her to question her self-worth? Why do you ask? Issei asked her, wrapping an arm around her to comfort Asia. I just feel like I'm not worth much. She whispered, looking at the ground as her depressed mood only grabbed hold of her more. Like I have only one purpose and nothing else. Issei felt his heart sink at that, remembering last night as Asia told him her past. That had been rough on her, but then having more events take place that only seemed to drill that point home. Issei pulled Asia against him as he held her tightly, making sure she could feel his friendship for her. Asia, he said to her, you are not a one-trick pony, you are my friend. That is something I will always cherish over whatever abilities you have or what you can do. Asia stiffened, relaxed before hugging him tightly. Shivering as she shed tears into her shirt, Asia held onto Issei. Just letting it all out in a session of sobbing and tears. But, she sobbed, all I can really do is heal stuff. For my gifts, I got thrown out of the one place I called my home, then I went to another place, but I was called a witch after others found me healing. I come here and do what I've always done, but then I nearly get taken advantage of by a false priest. Issei hugged her as she continued to let out everything that burdened her innocent heart, the tears staining his outfit as he held her close. Soon, Asia finally calmed down, hiccuping as she sniffled. Issei pulled out a handkerchief from his school bag, the one his dad gave him for emergencies like this one, and gently wiped away the tear streaks on Asia's innocent face. "Let's get home," Issei said as Asia slowly nodded, smiling a bit. "Mom and Dad will be worried over the late hour of our arrival." At the Haidu residence, the atmosphere was light and loving. Nothing amiss as Issei and Asia told their parents about the school day, while Goro gave them some stories of his time with the Guardians. Everything was going right as rain when everything took a turn. Miki Haidu was busy finishing up dinner as her family sat down when a chill went down her spine, one that made her look up like an alert prey animal. Goro, Asia and Issei all looked up at this as Miki gave her husband a look. Goro then grabbed the kids as Miki started weaving magics around the kitchen and dining room as the front door exploded off its hinges. The makeshift shield held before collapsing as Miki growled like a wolf at the intruders that dared to enter her home. Rogue exorcists came in, weapons at the ready. Their leader, an older woman with graying brown hair, fired at Miki with her gun. Miki deflected the bolt of light before calling upon two more Shinto deities. By the glorious light of Amaterasu and the enveloping silver shine of Tsukiyomi. Silver daggers appeared in the air around Miki as a golden flaming katana ignited into existence by her hand. Grabbing the flaming sword, Miki slashed with her hand as that caused the daggers to hurl themselves at the enemies before her. The daggers sunk deep, blood spurting as she closed in on them. Miki swung the sword, the golden aura cutting through the stunned exorcists like a knife through butter. The bodies turned to ash as they collapsed before Miki grimaced as another shard of light nearly hit her leg if Goro hadn't shot the shard out of the air. "Kids, stay down," he shouted as Miki called for the powers of Susanoo and Rajian once more. Lightning coursed through her as all four deities peered into her mind, curious as to why she was calling all four of them. Miki grunted as she lashed out with a slightly overpowered bolt of lightning that torched a fallen angel that came bursting through the window as Goro rushed up the stairs. The Shinto deities then decided on giving more of their powers to defend her home as the power rushed through her body. Miki curled her fingers into a claw-like gesture as lightning roared from her fingertips, catching a group of fallen and rogue exorcists in the storm of plasma energy. "Goro," Miki shouted, like it was another day without a home invasion, "have you found your sword yet?" "No, dear." "Then please hurry up." She groaned loudly, slashing the head off another stupid fallen that tried to run her through with a light spear. "The neighborhood is going absolutely bonkers." "I'm hurrying." "I can't find it because you sort of buried it beneath your garms," Goro said before Issei shouted over the cacophony of battle. "Can you two stop fighting and actually focus on the battle?" Then Asia screamed as a light spear nearly disintegrated her hand as Issei pulled her away. His right arm turned into that hideous golden scaled gauntlet before firing off several blasts from it. Miki sent several bolts of her own lightning over the heads of the children, striking the survivors of Issei's attacks. Miki then got kicked back, hitting the kitchen table as she rolled over it and landed on her feet. "Impressive but not good enough," the exorcist said before his head exploded in a shower of red from Issei's energy blast. "Where is Dad?" Issei gasped, looking pale as Asia clung to him in utter fear. Goro had finally gotten deep enough into the closet to find where he hid his sword, the one he had gotten when he caused an incident at the Guardians. He grabbed the sheath before rushing out of the closest, right into the metaphorical arms of a pair of fallen angels. He grimaced before grabbing the sword's handle, gold-fashioned with a curious workmanship. "What did the left one said before the blade removed both fallen angels' heads from their bodies. The blade didn't even get covered in their blood as Goro rushed out of the room, leaping down the stairs onto the back of an exorcist as he tried to stab his son through the back. "What the fuck, Dad?" Issei yelped before Goro wagged his finger. "Language, Issei," Goro said before stabbing the sword behind himself, the blade piercing the chest of the fallen that tried to get him from behind. "It's unbecoming of someone that is going to get married to have a dirty tongue." "But how is this relevant?" Issei shouted before blasting another fallen angel into a pile of crimson gore. "You'll understand when you're older," Miki snapped before Asia's screams could be heard. Goro noticed an exorcist had his hand on Asia, dragging her towards a window. He sent a dagger made of light at the man, the blade slicing open his throat as he turned. His sword caught the light blade of another exorcist, grinning as the woman looked in shock. "How?" she started to ask before Goro twisted his blade and took off her hands at the wrists. "Ancient sword used by the prophets and generals of old," he answered before his wife blasted the exorcist away. "Could you not flirt with all the younger generation, Goro?" she asked in exasperation. "They clearly have lost the fine art of flirtation," he shrugged before stabbing a fallen as she tried to spear Miki through the back, "though I believe they are trying to kill us, so I'll stop for now." "Ah. No. Let me go." Asia screamed as she was grabbed and pulled out the front door. "No," Issei panicked as he bolted for the door. Goro followed after his son as he shouted, "Asia. Looking up, Goro gritted his teeth as he saw a blue-haired fallen angel holding Asia by her upper arm, surrounded by more fallen angels. His son moved with irregular speed, but was then jumped by 4 fallen who impaled his back in sync. Issei yelled in both pain and frustration, as Asia and her captor seemed just out of reach. Before his attackers could inflict any more injuries, Goro leapt over them. He flung a dozen light daggers so quickly that the movements of his hands were almost undetectable to the naked eye. The sound of blessed steel raining down from above rang in Issei's ears before it stopped, followed by the heavy thud of 4 bodies hitting the floor. "Better, son. I've got your back," Goro said while fending off 3 other fallen. Without even hesitating, Issei jumped to his feet with a bit of a stumble and rushed towards the blue-haired woman who looked ready to take off. She paused momentarily as she noticed him, but just as Issei reached for Asia, she threw a light blast at his abdomen, making him keel over and groan in pain right at her feet. She tsk'd and kicked him square in the face. "We got the little bitch, we have a ritual to finish tonight. Let's go," she snapped, taking off into the darkness. "No," Issei snarled before one of his brown eyes bled into a crimson red. "No, no, 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 no. Son." Mickey reached for him, only for Goro to grab her hands. "Don't touch him," Goro hissed before motioning to his son's shadow with his head, "the thing may treat you like a threat or a meal." Mickey nearly screamed but forced it into a squeak as the spiny snake-like neck of the great evil slithered out of their son's shadow and seemed to be taking in the situation itself. It then slid back inside Issei's shadow before their son was running after the kidnappers, moving as though hell itself was on his heels. Both parents shot off after their child, wanting to help both Issei and Asia. Akeno Himejima was just finishing up her contract for the evening when she heard Asia's screams, causing her to look up and gasp in shock. Above her, Asia was being carried by one of the rogue fallen angels as they sped towards the abandoned church on the hill overlooking Kuo. "Oh no you don't," Akeno hissed under her breath, opening her devil wings and taking flight. Given that tonight was the night of the true blood moon, the only reason they would be trying this would be to extract her sacred gear at the height of its power. The Grimoire Queen wouldn't allow one of her favorite innocent students to get murdered in such a fashion, not on her watch. Electricity crackled between her fingers, singing a tune that promised lethal results as it started to build up in her hands. She gritted her teeth before flinging out her hands, blue lines of lightning flashing out and striking several of the fallen. Their bodies turned into ashen husks that fell to the ground below as Akeno readied for another strike. The one with 4 wings, flying in formation with a blue-haired bimbo and a short stack, turned and hurled a rather large spear of light at her. Akeno dodged, twirling through the air before throwing her own spear that was made of electricity right back. It missed her target and nicked the bimbo in the arm, making her drop Asia. Akeno dived, barely catching the young girl before she became a streak on the pavement. "Akeno-senpai." She gasped, holding on to the devil with shaking arms. Akeno twisted in the air, dodging a few more light spears before shooting off past the remaining fallen towards where the Haidu residence would be. Except the nearly got shot by several exorcists on rooftops. They had her trapped, the way to keep Asia safe was to "What's that noise?" Asia asked, causing Akeno to look around before she heard it too. It sounded like running feet, but it was moving too fast for it to be human before one of the exorcists screamed in alarm before he was hurled off the roof. Both young girls went still as they saw Issei, but his eyes were both red, glowing that alien crimson that didn't belong on this planet as the blood moon rose up behind Issei, which caused that organic gauntlet on his right arm to start glowing a brilliant golden hue. "Oh dear Mau," Akeno cursed under her breath, "I forgot that Issei would be affected by the blood moon, too." Issei's hair started to defy gravity as he was lifted up into the air, electricity sparking off his skin as he growled. His teeth turned sharp and draconic as he pointed at the 3 fallen angels that had kidnapped Asia. "Prepare to meet your creator, worms." The voice sounded like Issei's, but something within it was twisted. It was ominous, deeper even and possessed far more cruelty than Issei could ever have in his heart. Akeno dived to the ground, rolling with Asia to protect them both as they hit the grass and tumbled. Akeno was pretty sure Asia should not see what Issei would do to these fallen at all, or it might break her heart. Everything seemed to slow down the moment the blood moon peeked over the housetops as Kalwerner watched as that kid rose into the air without any wings. That was until he seemed to appear right in front of Donaseek, those alien red eyes glowing so brightly within his skull. Donaseek couldn't move fast enough as the kid's right hand shot out and gripped him around the throat before the claws dug deeply into his flesh. Donaseek gagged as the kid leaned in close, hissing, "I remember you, bird freak, you were the one to disintegrate my host's lungs and heart. I also remember blowing your chest wide open like some overripe fruit, shame it didn't stay that way." Donaseek tried to pull the arm away, but the gauntlet started to pulse, then Kalwerner nearly threw up. The gauntlet was drinking Donaseek's blood, greedily slurping it up through the embedded claws like it was some smoothie. Both Millet and Kalwerner watched as Donaseek's body paled, then his skin seemed to tighten around his bones before he turned to ash right before their eyes. Issei closed his hand into a fist before licking his lips like he had finished a fine meal. The brat then spun, kicking Millet, so she flipped through the air before his claws dug into her back. Her gasp left her lips before she too met Donasek's fate, her body disintegrating into dust as he focused his gaze on her. Her heart stopped beating before he pounced at her, claws reaching for her. Alwerner screamed as she formed a light spear, stabbing it into the boy's chest as his claws stabbed her between her huge breasts. He looked down then back up at her, grimacing as this was some minor inconvenience. "Really, my darling?" That boy said before digging those claws deeper into her chest as she couldn't breathe. "Was that how you wanted to give the last man you'll ever have a good time with? Tut-tut, bitch, where are your manners?" She gurgled as blood filled, then fled her mouth as she felt her blood all flow through her body into her chest, the golden gauntlet flexing as crimson lights could be seen flowing up the arm. In addition, she felt her body go weightless as her toes and fingers started to disintegrate, the wind blowing her body into nothing but she was still there. That was until that brat's claws wrapped around her, absorbing her too. Asia looked up as she didn't hear anything for a while before seeing Issei, floating in the air. He was looking at his clawed fingers, as though fascinated by them. She pushed herself away from Akeno, who tried to hold her back. Asia broke free and ran into the middle of the road. Her raven-haired senpai yelled after her, but the blonde girl ignored her. "Issei!" She screamed, causing him to turn. She stopped, seeing that both of his once brown eyes were glowing crimson. He then floated down and stood before her, growling like she had threatened him. Asia felt fear run through her before she shoved it away, pouncing and hugging Issei tightly. Issei went still, blinking before he started shaking like someone was electrocuting him violently. "Let me go, you vile creature." It shouted in Issei's voice, its shaking growing worse. "No," Asia hissed, glowing into those red eyes, "you give me back my friend, coward. You don't belong in Issei Haidu's body. Now let him go. You filthy mouth breather. Unhand my form this instant." It tried to pull her off, but something kept him from touching her. "Why can't I fucking touch you, whore?" "Issei won't let you." Goro Haidu said, causing Asia to look over her shoulder at the man who had at this point become something of a father figure to her. "My son won't let you harm the closest friend he's had in so many years." "Ah. No. Curse you, Haidu." It shrieked before Issei seemed to collapse in on himself, limply hanging in Asia's arms as the blood moon finally turned from red to white. "It's over," Mickey gasped before running up to Asia and her son. "Is he alright?" Oru came up, as did Akeno, as he said, "I think Asia saved his hide again." Asia blushed but held onto Issei as she used her sacred gear to heal him of the wounds that couldn't be seen on the surface. Issei woke up in his own bed when a wet cloth was put over his face, causing him to splutter and cough. Sitting up, Issei pulled the cloth off his face and blinked his blurry vision away. He then felt a pair of hands grab his shoulders before he was pushed back onto the bed. Finally getting his vision cleared, allowing him to see Akeno with Asia looking over her shoulder. "Finally awake are we?" Akeno smiled before Asia moved around her and hugged him. What happened?" he asked, weakly hugging Asia back. "You got possessed by that monster due to the blood moon last night," Akeno explained. "You are lucky it's the weekend or you would have missed school." Issei sighed before looking at the female devil with a questioning look. "Asia asked me to stay after I saved her life from the fallen," Akeno said with a smirk. "I must say, you are quite the catch in some circles in Kuo." "I feel like Kiba when you say that," Issei groaned, causing both girls to laugh at his meaning. "I'm not a pretty boy." "No, you're a rather handsome one," Akeno said with a nod, "one that would be happy to have a date like Asia or myself." Issei looked at both girls in confusion, as Asia lightly hit Akeno's arm. "He doesn't need to know that yet, let him heal, Akeno-senpai." "Fine," Akeno said with a smile, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I'll let him heal before he takes us on dates, how about that?" Asia nodded before smiling, looking expectantly at Issei. Issei, for the life of him, felt a chill run down his spine that wasn't from the monster inside his soul. This chill it wasn't unpleasant. The boy let it ease the buzzing, unordered thoughts in his head. Chapter 6. Interlude 1. Getting training. A month after Asia's attempted kidnapping, Issei's life was going surprisingly well, and he could comfortably say it was rather enjoyable. School was going well, he was able to sleep much better with Asia in his room, and he was getting to know Asia and Akeno better. Akeno had been occasionally flirtatious with him, but that was how usually the girl acted, so Issei didn't think much of it. After all, you don't just randomly get the title, the seductress in a place like Kuo Academy. On account of getting closer to the raven-haired beauty, Issei was able to introduce her to Aika, Katis and Murama. The group was pretty happy to have another girl to talk with, especially about Issei's health issues, much to the boys' horror. Akeno, thankfully, seemed to understand his reluctance and always tried to sway the topic of the conversation from that direction whenever he was around them. Issei was also being trained by his dad whenever he could spare the time, given that he was now active again. Though, he was pretty sure he needed someone else to help him train. Asia also would need some training as well, as she had not taken being the lump on a log well at all. He wasn't sure whom to trust with this. While he considered asking Riaz and her bunch to help out with the training process, he dismissed the thought after weighing up the possibility of a stable arrangement between the two of them forming. At the moment, Riaz Gremory was at the very least wary of him, and even though he had befriended her closest friend, he doubted that would sway her opinion enough to completely trust him. Issei could not blame her for that. He knew what she had seen him as. Then, during PE, an idea struck the young man. Naima was just finishing putting away her items when she heard the basketball court doors open, causing her to look up to see Issei and Asia coming inside. She was curious as to why they were here when the last bell rang before both bowed to her, confusing her even more. "Sensei," both said at the same time, "please teach us." What?" Naima muttered, her eyes blinking once. "Teach you what? Can you be a little more, I dunno, specific?" As if Naima's questions fell on deaf ears, Asia looked up at her, pleading with her innocent puppy dog eyes. "Please sensei, we need to get stronger and to be able to defend ourselves." Issei nodded. "After the fallen angels, I've been trying to train with my dad, but he's busy with guardian duties and being a father and also a husband, so me and Asia came to you given that you're the Red Dragon Empress." "Ah, okay, I see what this is." Naima looked at them before sighing. "Come on you two, follow me to my car." "Why just like that?" Issei asked, seemingly taken aback by the quick acceptance. He looked ready to inquire more, but Naima shushed him with a raised index finger. "You two know about the supernatural and are obviously abnormal entities yourselves. I wouldn't not consider helping you out with supernatural business." She explained, then gave a slight awkward smile while pushing a strand of hair back. "Besides, you two know my secret but have never used that to reap any benefits during my classes. I appreciate that." She motioned for them to follow and walked off. She could sense the shared look of momentary puzzlement before they both dropped it and just went along with her. Her smile grew a little. Those two had a very easygoing nature, despite some factors suggesting otherwise. Asia and Issei helped carry her stuff to the rather nice and expensive car before climbing inside it as she got into the driver's seat. Turning the car on and making sure that both of her students were buckled in, she drove off to her private dojo. The trip allowed her to think about what the pair said, given that she was well versed in the going-ons in most of the supernatural world. Naima wasn't one to take on students as apprentices, not like a swordmaster would, being that she was the Red Dragon Empress. That would be hard enough on her learners, not to mention all the enemies Drake's hosts had created. But these two had clearly wanted to do more than just sit around and wait for someone to come along. They came to her, and as much as she disliked that, she felt as if it was no longer her choice to make. She pulled into a single-car garage before getting out, looking at the pair. "Come on." Both quickly got out and helped her carry her stuff inside before she turned on the lights, making both of her PE students stare in shock at the room. It was massive, full of exercising equipment and even a boxing ring. Both looked at her in shock as the questions were in their eyes. "I'm a rather well-off woman," Naima said before tossing her bag onto a chair. "Anyway, you want me to train you? First off, I may be the host of Drag, but how does that automatically mean I have any experience in fighting?" Issei blinked before saying, "So you don't know how to fight?" Naima slapped her forehead. "Issei, I know you are really smart, but that was a dense question to ask." Issei flushed as Asia said, "So you do know, can you teach us?" Naima groaned. "Look, why in the world would you want to fight at all? Especially you, Miss Argento. You look like the type of person who wouldn't even kill a fly." Issei answered, "Because if I don't, I can't defend those closest to me. I nearly lost Asia because of my lack of fighting experience and training." Asia nodded. "I want to learn how to fight, so I don't have to be a damsel in distress. I want to be able to take care of myself, so Issei can focus on his own battle, instead of worrying about me all the time and getting hurt for it." Naima looked at them both, taking in their extremely determined expressions. There was something about the little sparkles in their innocent eyes that evoked a pleasant sense of déjà vu in her. Almost like an old memory. She could feel the self-contained cheeky quip that was edging on that stupid red dragon's lips. Naima groaned before sighing in defeat. Fine. Tomorrow, after school. Be here, we'll start with the basics." "Yes sensei." Naima couldn't believe it. After a month of training, both of her new students were rather impressive. Of course, after she had shown them one of her dense titanium balls that she crushed in her hand to relieve stress, she was pretty sure they'd pass out from the feat of strength. Of course, that was in her regular body, given her rather unusual training to stay alive as long as she had. She would boost herself once, then hold onto that boost for a month. At the end of the month, she'd boost again, starting the process over. Rinse, repeat. That's what she had been doing for the past 11 to 12 years, meaning her body was now ridiculously powerful. So, she had to learn how to control her strength as well. That had been a rather tedious regime to go through, but she had done it. Issei was busy punching at a training dummy while Asia had taken up kickboxing, something Naima was rather well versed in but never studied further due to the teacher being into her body more than her training. As she watched the pair, she quickly corrected Asia as she made a very severe mistake. "Don't allow your leg to overextend," she instructed, holding Asia's leg at the correct distance. "It goes this far and no further or someone can grab your leg and use it against you." As the young girl nodded, she turned to see Issei sending the dummy at her. She punched it right back, knocking him flat on his back with a groan. "Don't forget, Issei," Naima commented as she walked over and pulled the rather heavy dummy off him, "that your opponent can punch the object right back and with even greater force." "I noticed, sensei," Issei hissed, rolling over onto his hands and knees. "Why are these things so heavy?" Naima sighed, then pulled herself into the ring before slamming her fist into the dummy, causing a dull thud to echo through the dojo as the dummy flew up, then crashed to the floor. Imprinted on the dummy's belly was Naima's fist, causing Issei to look up at her in shock. "Being so strong makes it harder for me to train properly," she said casually, rolling her shoulders. "That was a metal dummy with a rather soft core. Heavy for you to hit, but for me? It's like hitting a rather cold metallic putty." Issei got up and grimaced as his ruptured and split skin repaired itself, something Naima had learned from a previous experience. Issei had been punching one of the more durable dummies until his hands were nothing but fleshy messes before Issei simply told Naima to cut them off. She had and was expecting Asia to heal him when his hands regrew from their stumps. It had not been a pretty sight to see Issei's face as his hands regrew. He looked absolutely in hell. Naima then refocused Issei, having him dodge and weave through several workouts before calling a halt on everything. "Given that in another month," she said, "we are heading to Aichi Academy, I wanted to make sure you both were ready to deal with what is going to happen there." Asia looked at Issei before returning her gaze to Naima. "I believe so." Issei shrugged, "Not much else could still really hurt me. Sure, I've gotten stronger, but I have a monster in my body that refuses to let me die anyway." Naima sighed, "We really need to work on your positivity, Issei." Asia nodded, "Not everything is doom and gloom, Issei. You got me, mom and dad, Akeno, Aika, Kata-san. Issei smiled at that reminder before Naima coughed, getting their attention. "Again, same time tomorrow. I expect you both to have something ready before we leave for Kyoto, in case you both fall under the scrutiny of one of the 5 swords at Aichi." "Yes, sensei." Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.